Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we're diving into a brand new story, Is It Wrong for the Strongest T Get Even Stronger Part 4 by Keedman Cousland. And as they moved, the ones directly under them also had to. Every familiar with prestige worrying on what it would say about them if those above them leveled up. That their value would decrease as those at top pushed higher. The Apollo familiar feared that they would be disrespected if too much a gap formed between them and the more respected middle-ranked familiar like Modi or Circuit. The Modi and Circuit familiars feared what would happen if the Aether familiar rose higher. All the way to Loki familiar refusing to be a clear second to the Freya familiar, and Ganesha familiar fearing they would become too weak to remain as a force of order between the two juggernauts. Typical, for Lily's life to be so defined by the mere after-effects of the actions of others. Still, she needed to take advantage of it, and she was narrowing down her options. The Aether familiar, a B-ranked familiar. Lily approached this familiar even more carefully than the others. After all, the Aether familiar was one of Orario's high-ranking familiars. The sort that would look at the Soma familiar as trash on the road. She eyed from a distance their familiar home, named Dandara. It was already a fine, if simple, mansion with attached dorms, but work was being done on it. Construction workers were taking down several of the nearby townhouses, and some foremen and architects clearly laying out expansion options. Around them were numerous adventurers who walked with the air of the strong. Lily saw a figure on the roof. Her eyes narrowed in, feeling an undeniable draw. It was a dark-skinned woman, with long black hair. She also had numerous golden bangles and other accessories. Sitting on the roof, she was merely watching the going-ons with an enigmatic smile. Before her head turned and Lily's eyes met hers. Goddess. Uther herself. Lily felt the realization in an instant, and pulled back beyond the corner in an instant, shivering at the little knowing smile she'd received in that moment. Most gods, in her experience, were frivolous and remarkably disappointing, but at times they also did something that made her very much feel like this was a game and she merely a set piece. Deciding she wanted to make more distance after that, Lily retreated. Believed checking out the area closer to the Aether familiar home would be ineffective. After considering, she eventually entered an inn up the road towards Babel that Aether and other nearby familiars would have to pass by. Lily entered the inn in guise of an elf, blonde and innocent-looking. Excuse me, Lillian would like to know if you might need an extra pair of hands tonight. She spoke, shifting her voice. The innkeep said as he looked down on her. With changing her size being the greatest restriction of Cinderella, she had to stick to younger members of other races. So, his baffled look at seeing an elven child alone wasn't unexpected. What are you doing here, dearie? Lillian is meeting someone soon, but they were late, she stuttered out, bowing deeply as she continued quickly. Lillian is willing to work. She only needs enough money to last tonight, she promises. She'll do whatever you need for enough to do that. Honest labor, she promises. Put off by an elf child bowing to him, the innkeeper looked around at the looks coming at him and shifted before barking. Kelly, come out here and help me handle this. Once he called his wife and fellow in worker forward, Lily found it easy to manipulate them. An extra set of hands for a single night was valuable enough to acknowledge, while the amount it cost was small enough to not need great consideration. Once Lillian suggested a salary that really would only be good enough for the night, they had little reason to refuse. The appearance also helped. Hey, where did you find a little cutie like this to work as a waitress, old man? I'm not old, and she just popped up on her own. Needed some Velis and food. She'll just be here for tonight. Tonight only? Well, best I drink a lot then and leave a good tip, ha ha ha. The response to Lillian only illustrated that. Elves were always attention-drawing, and cute, young elves with a happy smile and innocent facade even rarer. Most were stoic and distant, so all Lily had to do was laugh and flash smiles to win everyone over. This disguise was one of her favorites. Whenever she used it as a supporter, she inevitably got treated far nicer. Too bad that it was too tempting. Lone elves without obvious comrades were rare. Young elves vulnerable to influence or just vulnerable entirely even more so. Those she worked with always became too interested in her, trying to properly recruit the elf into their familiars. Or worse. It was good to be cute, but to be too cute and desirable while an independent supporter was asking to draw certain types you didn't want focused on you. This was a good time to make use of it. The Valis would be pointless, but it got her into the inn. She was also soon taking food and drink to the customers. The place was even busier than usual with the rare sight of a cute elf serving, and so it was easy enough to guide conversations to tell her about the Ether Familiar. They were well known in this part of town. Their captain and vice-captain were level 4, and married beside. A rare case of a couple coming to Orario, and neither dying even as they worked their way up the adventurer ladder over a decade. Level 4 for 2 years now, strong ones, there was already anticipation on when they would level up again. Level 5 meant it was all but impossible to guess when one would manage to jump over that wall that stopped so many high-tier adventurers in their track, but the two seemingly were talented enough there were hopes. Hopes of the entire Ether Familiar, who were just waiting till they had first-class adventurers of their own. It was clear they had intentions once that happened, even if Lily was far removed from such politics. The Ether Familiar appeared to have been spreading their influence among the city's middle-ranking familiar for a while, providing financial aid, coordinating cooperative expeditions into the dungeon, and more. Considering the gods of that region of the heavens had always tended to be ambitious towards the established order. Instead, more relevant to her was the shift that had happened recently. It seems the Ether Familiar had shifted along with the other familiars, lowering their funding of other familiars in favor of expanding their familiar. Many of the adventurers here were of said familiars, grumbling that Ether was expanding and more, focusing more on deep expeditions. It made their need for Lily clear, which together with the second-best contract terms made this the first familiar Lily approached. "Oh, so you are the one that has come forward regarding our call for supporters," was what greeted Lily when she walked in, only for a lighter, teasing voice to then add on, "Oh, she's cute. You don't have to be so stern, honey. It's best to treat this seriously." "Boo, but I prefer when you aren't so stiff," the woman of the two said, turning to Lily to wink and whisper. His voice is so smooth when he is relaxed. Tilda dreamy Tilda. Lily kept her smile on her face, but mainly as she didn't know how to reply to that. These two were cunning, to use such a ploy to throw off the applicants. Although it was expected. In her investigation, she had checked the public information of the guild. So, she could at least recognize the appearances of these two. The captain and vice-captain of the Ether Familiar. Meritites Mused, nicknamed Menet, the dancing cat. Level 4. Tan skin paired well with vibrant green eyes and a bob of purple hair. Her atmosphere was light though, already making odd, cat-like motions with her hands as Lily looked at her. Kahai Mused, nicknamed Alati, dragon tattoo man. Level 4. He was, well, handsome. Lily has to give him that. With semi-long hair and a sharp face, he looked good even before he raised a hand to run through his hair. Although the tattoo on his left arm also drew attention. "Greetings," Lily finally said, trying to continue the conversation to business over, whatever that was. Bowing, she said in a saccharine tone, "Lily saw your honored familiar's flyer at the guild. It would please her greatly to be able to assist such amazing adventurers." Really?" Kahai said, clearly not taken in as he ran his eyes over her. "I hope you understand what your duties are and why you are being hired." Lily is well used to the duties of a supporter, although she cannot claim to have any insight to such a strong familiar like yours. "Well, we need to free up our level 1s a bit," Meritites claimed, grinning. "We'll be doing an expansion with some new recruiting once the new buildings are finished, and we need to make sure to get as many of our level 1s as high as possible." Not that unusual. Most familiar tried to recruit in batches. New level 1s in groups that can cooperate in the early floors, with preferably last rotations level 1s more veteran and seasoned by then. It also was the best use of space that familiars could offer. Not all were as wealthy as the Ether Familiar or Apollo Familiars, able to create familiar homes like this able to house so many. Even the Soma Familiar was one of the larger familiars, due to their alcohol business, and most lived spread out between numerous inns or business facilities. Most smaller familiar had 1 or 2 townhouses. As time passed and their current members died off, it opened up space for new recruits. This cycle of recruitment, seasoning, losses, and then recruitment again determined the recruiting seasons of Orario. Although the fact that the Ether Familiar had chosen to expand their familiar home, and they were pushing their members so much they needed to recruit outside supporters made clear that this wasn't the usual routine anymore. Should you have sufficient basic abilities and prove yourself trustworthy, we also hope to eventually have you support parties of level 2s deeper in the dungeon. Such talk is premature, however, Kahai said, sobering the mood again as he met Lily's eyes. She instinctively dropped her own. "So, your name is Lily. Of what familiar?" "Lilarukarad, if it pleases you. And she is part of the Soma Familiar," she said, Not having to fake the wince at the admittance and the raised eyebrow it resulted in even from the light-hearted woman. Lily bowed, speaking rapidly. But Lily promises to aid you as best as possible. Lily has multiple years of experience as a supporter, and she has E-ranked agility as your flyer requested. And yet that isn't the issue here, Kahai claimed, looking at the flyer she'd filled out and turned in before she was brought here. It says here you are requesting to cooperate every other week. Yes, sir. And what about your off week? Meritites jumped in playfully with a smile. Oh, do you have a boyfriend? Fun, Naya Tilda. So many adventurers dance around it. Lily wasn't sure why she said the Naya since she wasn't even a cat person, maybe a parent was, but she instead said while looking small and pitiful, no, but I need the weeks off. As you realize, Lily's familiar is troublesome. She promises she isn't trying to trick you either. Trying to trick from or steal from a group like this would just be suicide. She made sure to put on a determined look though as she continued. Lily also is willing to make an agreement to assure you of that. Lily is willing to allow you to hold her pay for 3-month periods, so long as you notify the guild of the amount owed. Should Lily abandon her duties per the contract, you can withhold it. My weeks off are to ensure I can support myself. That is all. It almost hurt to say those words, but they were needed. Not necessarily to get them to agree to her working under them, but for Lily's own circumstances. After all, the other major consideration on whether to take this job is whether she can get away with it despite her familiar. She had little intent on allowing them to screw her over again, and so this was part of what she had come up with. That seems like a good deal for us, Meritites said, tilting her head back and forth while having a finger pressed against her chin. It does. Almost unnecessarily so, her husband responded though, eyes narrowing at Lily. Lily tried to shrink and project helplessness. She sensed it didn't work as a smirk broke over his face, as he drawled out in an admittedly dreamy voice. Oh Tilda, so that's what it is. Earning enough on your off weeks, eh? I suppose you'll also be requesting us to tell anyone who asks that we are paying you every other week. Lily smiled innocently. He got her. Then I suppose this is worth a shot, he remarked, leaning back with a small grin. You want to start next week, I assume. Why yes, Mr. Adventurer. Then arrive here at Dandara no later than an hour after sunrise. We'll be heading for an expedition into the dungeon, and we won't be having a level 2 with our level 1s, so you need to be recorded here as showing up alongside leaving and returning with the party assigned to you. Yay, I'm sure the babies will be happy. Especially when they see we got a cute one for them, Meritites said, popping off the table she'd been sitting on and all but dancing as she crossed the distance to start poking Lily's cheek. You can call me Mera. Nice ta meet YA properly. Let's make some funnier memories. Definitely some cat person heritage. One half of her plan made, Lily then had to go and settle the other half. Arguably the most delicate and risky half. By the goddess, it was hard to imagine she would ever have been willing to do this just several days. Lily walked into guild at an appointed time and searched for what she needed. It wasn't hard to find. An Amazon, sitting at a small table near the boards. She looked bored, but also was talking to several others that were clearly supporters. Taking a deep breath, Lily approached. It didn't go unnoticed. The Amazon looked up before Lily even got halfway there, eyeing her with a purple eye. It made Lily shiver. The Amazon was beautiful and obviously showing it off. Her clothes were little more than underwear styled like a dancer's attire, fully revealing a full figure. Together with a mature face and long hair that covered one eye, most male adventurers would be rendered drooling morons, well, moreso or by her. Lily felt like that single eye was that of a predator deciding whether to eat the scrawny prey walking up to it. Lily lowered her head, but continued forth before asking in a small voice, Mistress Aisha of the Ishtar Familiar. The Ishtar Familiar. In some ways, the familiar Lily had avoided the most for years. If they learned of Cinderella, Lily would have no chance. She'd have drawn the gaze of something far stronger than Zani's or Kono. Yet here she was. That is me, although the mistress part is unnecessary, the Amazon said. You another supporter, boy. Yes, Miss Aisha. Levi is ready to work, and is honored that he might assist the mighty Ishtar Familiar, Lily said. She had chosen her disguise carefully this time. Firstly, she took the form of a boy. A Paolum boy with average looks, and a rather large birthmark on the left cheek. Not attractive enough to draw any eyes for looks. Amazons wouldn't look at a Paolum either as a potentially strong person of interest either. Together with some clothes Lily had stolen from a family with a young boy that hung clothes out to dry, She hoped she was as uninteresting to a familiar of Amazons and prostitutes as possible. It seemed to work based on the woman's unimpressed hum, although she quickly asked, time frame of contracted work. The third plan outlined. The offer for every other week, for 1 full month with chance of extension at end. Weeks pay at end of each day according to listed fixed daily sum alongside minor increase, according to percent of total payout should we surpass a certain amount. It was rather weird that of all the familiars putting out missions, the Ishtar Familiar one would be the most professionally written. Although, maybe it shouldn't be. They were partly a business-type familiar too. Those used to running brothels and who knows what else probably knew how to write contracts. Still had forced Lily to read the contract over 5 times to ensure they didn't slip something in. Aisha merely nodded though, noting it down while continuing to question. Highest basic ability. E rank in agility. Years of experience. Over 5. Ability to guide other new supporters. I should. Nodding, she commented lightly. All right. We'll see if what you say is true. We'do have a 3-day probationary period to ensure you have spoken true and lived up to expectations. Here is 20,000 valis as upfront pay for said 3 days. That made Lily's eyes widen as adventurers never paid upfront, and she hesitated before saying, this is too much for someone like Levi, Miss Aisha. He should be happy merely to be able to help a familiar as great as yours. Levi's familiar always says he is useless and only messes things up, so he is happy to be given any chance. No need for such theatrics, even if I'm more used to other types of exaggeration, she said with a snort though, waving her hand dismissively. I am aiming for someone able to be trusted in a longer term. If 20,000 valis is enough to make you run, I'd pay you that much just to not have to deal with you. Lily felt her hands tighten around the money at that. Something that was just pittances for someone like this to throw away, but was days of work for her. More than 3 days. It was more 5 to 7 decent days payout for Lily. Yet despite the frustration, it also reinforced Lily's choice. Of all the offers, the Ishtar Familiar had been the most generous. Not unexpected, since they were one of the richest familia in Orario. Lily could make double the amount working under them than her usual routine, at least. If Lily had only worked for the Itha Familia, her fellow Soma Familia members would have honed in on her. Moved immediately to take her earnings. Lily also had to take her real appearance that was guild-recognized. Itha Familia had stated they wanted to confirm Familia membership. After all, hiding her working for them was impossible. She needed to have some way to throw them off. Eventually she had hit on this scheme. Have the Itha Familia store her earnings from them, and only work every other week. Make it appear she was heading to the Itha Familia every day, lose any tails, and then come here in disguise to work for Ishtar Familia. The hefty payouts means that Lily could use it to disguise as her payment from the Itha Familia. Lily did not believe the Itha Familia would do anything but drop her if her Familia members started bothering them, so Lily just had to trick her Familia by losing a hefty sum every other week and convince them it was all her pay. It was irritating to have to do, but was necessary if she wanted to be able to build up the reserve to buy her freedom. Well, stand with the others, Aisha dismissively said, conversation over. No one else came though, so ultimately Aisha stood up and escorted their small group to Babel, where a large number of Amazons was present. The Ishtar Familia. A lot of them. Go stand with those over there, Aisha ordered them, pointing. They are the ones going to act as supporters. We'll organize you later. Lily did so without a word, trying to blend in. This many Amazons was intimidating, after all. If there was one race that most consistently leveled up, it was Amazons. The 100 here was a monumental force, if even half of them were level 2. The sort of thing that would wash over just about every familiar in Orario. The way every other adventurer in Babel was avoiding them only further illustrated this. This was the force the Itha Familia was supposedly eyeing to replace in the top 5 strongest familia. No wonder they were hoping to expand. Hopefully Lily would be far out of the way when something happened in that regard, despite inadvertently finding herself putting herself right between them for the near future. Okay, you all, Aisha suddenly yelled from up front, making the Amazons look towards her. She was standing with a number of other Amazons that clearly made up the leadership. Fern and Tama's already headed in with a few others, so let's get moving too. We already went over this the past few days. Samaya is taking most of the level 3s down to the dense forest labyrinth. The Lily recognized level 4 Amazon with short, white head punched her own palm as she announced eagerly. You all know the plan. We've basically been given free rein to push our basic abilities as high as possible. As far as I am concerned, the next 2 months we are being ordered to fight, kill, and eat our fill of excelia as much as our hearts desire. We'll then properly turn towards leveling up. This is non-optional, so don't fall behind as I'm not slowing down for anyone. Aisha rolled her eyes, but then continued, we've already split the level 2s and newer level 3s according to their status into 4 groups from the cave labyrinth to the water city. Each team leader has been designated. Tamas shall be checking in on you. Those gathered nodded, already filtering into more distinct groups. I shall also be checking when I can, Aisha continued, before turning to the younger Amazons. My primary priority is guiding the level 1s, however. Everyone with AD and basic abilities is going to be pushed towards a schedule to level up in 6 months. We've arranged as much support as possible so you can focus entirely on fighting. Money is of no issue. We'll be going hard for a full week in the upper floors, and you'll then serve as supporters to the level 2s in the middle floors for a 5 days followed by 2 days break. The level 1s previously used as supporters shall then be allowed to train themselves on the off week. Am I understood? A variety of calls went out. The Amazons worked up by this point. Ooh, a little whimper went up from behind Lily. She couldn't help looking at the source, finding herself looking at a blonde Renard with a large cloak pulled up over her head. Underneath the cloak was a red kimono that was loose enough to show off a full bust. She also looked sick and on the verge of crying. My stomach hurts, Tilda. Are you okay? Lily asked, sweat dropping at the sheer contrast between this one and the Amazons. The Renard had been here from the beginning, so she was seemingly Ishtar familiar. Why yes, don't worry about me, the Renard answered though, looking down sadly. I wouldn't want to trouble you. It is of no trouble, Lily said. Levi is the one who might trouble you. His familiar members always say so, and they obviously can't be wrong. And my familiar members often say the same, the Renard responded, nodding at Lily in commiseration. It actually made Lily pause, before she continued. Well, besides Aisha. She always looks out for me. That made Lily twitch in irritation. Levi is lucky to be able to stand in the presence of you then, Lily gritted out, hiding it beneath a wide smile. Oh, you don't need to say such things about me, the Renard said though looking down in depression again. I am not worth such regard. Levi wants to say it, she retorted. He isn't often around such beautiful women. Oh, thank you. Apologies, we have not been introduced. My name is Haroheim. Aisha's voice rang out, making them both look at the approaching level 3. She eyed Lily, clearly having seen him talking to the now-named Renard. You'll join my group, you two. Best check you out. Why yes, Aisha. Of course, Lady Aisha. This miserable one is honored to be so favored. Snorting again, she looked between them again before adding, you said you have experience. Haroheim is acting as a supporter for now, and needs to be shown the ropes. Make sure to watch out for her. If I am not there, you should behave as if her life is yours. Because, as far as I am concerned, it is. Lily's face stiffened. Is that really necessary? Haroheim asked, looking down. I don't want to make anyone worry over me. I shall handle myself, somehow. Wow, Lily was honestly impressed at how good this girl was at basically crying for help even while saying the opposite. She was a good actor. Aisha wasn't amused though, saying, your spell is useless here, and you're more likely to hurt yourself with a weapon than a monster. We're just getting you used to the atmosphere while protected for now. We can train outside, but this is necessary. Lily felt a stone drop in her stomach. Oh no, a spell baby. Those blessed individuals who immediately had some valuable support spell. Healers or potion makers. So valued their familiars. They were valued even if they didn't have anything else to offer. Never placed in danger. At least till a level up would be convenient, when they instead receive the support of everyone around them, even if it meant carrying around a useless sack in the dungeon. Protected, coddled, and constantly guided by high-tier adventurers. The complete antithesis of Lily, whose spell, the one saving grace she'd ever been granted in this life, was only something that would have her put in a brothel if discovered. And Lily had just been saddled with this one. Eep. Duck, Lily yelled, barely managing to keep her voice disguised even as she aimed her crossbow. Duck. 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 Yet despite her words, the Renard spent most of it just running at her in a panic, blocking the shot on the dungeon lizard following her. It was only at the last moment that she finally listened to the order, ducking and just allowing Lily to shoot it through the head before it dived on the Renard. How the hell did a supporter panic so bad, on the 3RDF floor? The mere sight of the monster popping up near her had been enough to send her in a panic. First running away, then running past the protecting level 1s, and only turning back when another popped out. Haruheim. Aisha sighed out, clearly having let it play out just to watch. The others in the group were snickering. It made Haruheim look down sadly once again, and Lily felt it necessary to step forward and offer her a hand, stating brightly, "It's okay, Lady Haruheim. I'm terrified of monsters too. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Thank you," Haruheim said as she took the hand and slowly stood. Lily also reassured herself that it was just that. Some spell baby finally being pushed into the dungeon. Panicking. She'd surely get better. It couldn't be that bad. Oh, it turned out it could. "Just cut here," Lily said, showing where to cut the war shadow corpse to get at the magic stone. "They are thin, so it shouldn't be hard." Oh, okay," Haruheim said back, hands shaking as she held the dagger. "Just take your time," Lily reassured her, even as she felt her patience straining. "It's dead. It's not moving. There's nothing to worry about." "I'm going to do it," Haruheim said, hesitating several more times. She eventually closed her eyes though and said, "I'm going to do it." The dagger hit the stone floor, and Lily felt her heart skip a beat, in relief at the close miss. How did she get closer to stabbing her own leg than the monster corpse? "Keep moving." Hi. Despite Haruheim's words, her actions once again contradicted it. In this case, she tripped. Her own staff, ostensibly only to keep monsters away from her, was lowered till it tangled her own legs. Tumbling onto the ground, she also failed the very basic instinct to get up and continue running. Lily had to start towards her as the killer ants closed, calling out, "Lady Haruheim." Aisha suddenly appeared in a flash, a one-handed slash obliterating the 4 killer ants instantly before she said shortly, "Get up, Haruheim. At least work on not getting caught by the strays since the girls are handling 9 out of 10. The level 3 was then gone again, looking over the entire battle against the flood of killer ants that had been called by the pheromones of the injured ones. Lily was reminded that higher-tier adventures were insane. Who else but an insane person would purposefully injure half a dozen killer ants to bring a whole pass parade down on themselves? Forced to put aside such complaints, she moved forward and started pulling Haruheim to her feet as she told her, "Come on, Lady Haruheim. Levi will help, but we need to keep moving. Just follow me, okay?" "Why yes." Tilda. Haruheim let out a little surprised gasp as her foot slipped climbing back up some stairs, starting to fall backwards. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Lily said as she, right behind her, had to catch her form. If it wasn't for her Falna strength, her small form couldn't have even managed it. As it was, she barely managed to support her once she was leaned up against her back to front. Levi's got you." Thank you." "No problem," Lily said aloud, even as inside she raged at how one could even turn walking up some steps into a life-threatening activity if not protected. Lily's stamina wasn't so good. It had to be admitted. At endurance ranked May despite all her years, Lily was often the one getting tired first in her parties despite fighting the least. So, it was very new to have to prop up and support another when they ran out of stamina part way through a dive. "I'm sorry, again," Haruheim said, arm over Lily's shoulders and draped over her as she was only half walking. She looked again like she was going to cry. "I've only been troubling you all day." "And no, Lady Haruheim," Lily forced out, breathing heavily at how much weight she was supporting. "Our assist was not meant to be used for this. This Levi is honored to be of such help to you." Mr. Levi." "Yes, Lady Haruheim. Your head is pressing against my chest." Lily couldn't help laughing, and not from amusement, as she said, "My height is making this awkward. 1,000 apologies for one such as Levi to touch you so. He is not worthy. Please forgive him." Yes. I am not worthy of such consideration. You are already helping me, as it is, so do not worry," Haruheim said as she looked away with a blush. "Haruheim," Aisha called, walking back to suddenly lift up a yellow potion. "Take this stamina potion. It should keep you going a bit longer." Lily found another reason to be annoyed, as 6,000 Valis was drunk without thought. "Okay, that's enough for today," Aisha announced when they returned to the 1st floor. Near 8 hours having passed since they entered. Aisha gestured at the bag Haruheim was carrying, ordering, "Give that to them. We'll be staying down here for a bit longer. We need to see if we can get you to be able to handle even a single goblin," Aisha claimed, sighing. "I think it's better we keep you learning better suited things like chanting or potions, but Lady Ishtar ordered this. Does Lady Aisha or Lady Haraheim need any further assistance? Lily reluctantly forced herself to ask, since her need for this job to continue surpassed her irritation. Haraheim looked touched by the words for some reason though, only to deflate when Aisha answered bluntly, "No. You did more than enough to impress today. Keep it up, and we'll have no problems. This is none of your business though, so just move on." "Yes, Lady Aisha," Lily said happily, although trying to hide it as she turned and bowed to Haraheim. "I wish you a good night, Lady Haraheim. It was a pleasure." "Why yes. Thank you for helping me as much as you have," the Renaud said as she bowed in return. "I am looking forward to see you tomorrow, Mr. Levi." "Levi feels much the same," Lily forced out. "That's enough," Aisha said, turning Haraheim around and walking away. "I'll be giving you several hours of training each day, so. Several hours of personal training by a level 3 too." Lily thinks she hates this girl. 63rd floor of the dungeon Arctic Tundra. The Arctic Tundra name might be a misnomer. If he wasn't incorrect, a tundra was meant to largely be frozen plains with little, larger vegetation, not necessarily fitting the larger islands that made up this floor, as much hills and sharp mountains as fields. Although, no one least of all himself would claim Otter was well informed about such niche academic knowledge, and he honestly cared even less about such minutiae, especially as the presence of trees very much made the frozen landscape more hospitable. Of course, that was only in relative terms. It was still ultimately a frozen landscape ready to sap the warmth from one's bones. The snow was up to his knees, and the weather erratically shifted from a calm, heavy cold to an icy and snow wind that wished to strip flesh. The vegetation that was seemingly so much more prevalent than the polar seas, which was primarily small glacial islands with vegetation solely around pantries, was also wood and other plant materials that couldn't be eaten. The scarce berries and fruits were also still of the deadly sort that required one to be as robust as Otter to easily subsist on. However, trees allowed fire. As Otter felt the warmth, he had to admit it was better than a bed of dead monsters. The dungeon down here followed the same day-night cycle as Riveria and elsewhere, so the falling darkness had made it a good time to do this. So, he found himself sitting on a downed trees while using a stick to tend the fire. Looking into it, feeling its warmth and feeling the ancient instinct rising that correlated the light and heat with safety from the cold darkness that surrounded. Although, as Otter's sharp ears picked up the subtle rustling in the darkness, he acknowledged that said instinct was a lie. In the dungeon, safety was an illusion. Yet that wasn't a problem for him. Otter had long internalized that truth. In fact, he had actually been counting on it. As comforting as the fire was, it also served as a beacon for all the nocturnal hunters, bringing them to him as opposed to him needing to track the nocturnal hunters down in their own turf. He could have done the latter, his senses were good enough, but even he could appreciate a small break of being able to enjoy a fire after days of forcing himself to endure the cold without surrendering to the impulse to don a single cloak or jacket to soften the biting cold. He had endured the bitterest of cold from his earliest days. He didn't have to like it. Feeling eyes upon him, Otter stood. The fire cast a blinding light in the darkness, but his eyes pierced through. He spotted the glowing eyes, heard the shifting of dirt as they moved to surround him, smelled the blood and drool dripping from their jaws. Otter twisted his shoulders, allowing a spit attack from connecting with his shoulders. Then he ducked for another to pass over his head. A leg was lifted. His back arched backwards. He spun on one foot to avoid an attempt at his hips before returning back to the same position. Without moving from his starting position, the coordinated assault coming from all sides were all smoothly dodged without excess movement. After said failure, an almost barking cry rang out. The monsters then jumped to attack more directly. The multipronged assault was smooth and sudden, but Otter's hands had already risen to his blades. The dual blades flashed outwards, forming flashes of light that met the approaching monsters. Heads and jaws were split in an instant. More attacked, both directly and attempting to use the openings for their spit attacks to land. His patient approach had drawn quite a pack, so they had the numbers to use the strategy quite effectively. Would bring down quite a few foes far larger and stronger than them. Not Otter. His defense was unshakable and precise. Every swing of his blades cut the monsters in range. His feet flowed to avoid every spit attack. Not a single attack got closer to him than he allowed. Eventually, the leader of the pack moved. Its attempts to use the darkness for its attacks failed. Heavier steps were apparent to Otter's ears and greater potency of its pheromones stinging his nose. As it launched at him with a lunging bite, Jaws opened wide enough to bite his entire torso. The hilt of one blade landed directly on its nose. A crunch rang out and it recoiled, but his other blade came around and cut it across its face. Otter continued the assault without relenting, unbothered by the monster looming over him. Even as the rest of the pack swarmed in, they were cut down as the leader was brought down one cut at a time. 1, 2, 3 cuts opened on its neck. Another hilt blow snapped the crest on its head that it tried to use as a weapon. A stab to the hamstring when he gained its rear made it fall. And as the final pack member was killed with a simply flick of his wrist, a jump allowed Otter to come down on the back of its neck as it unsteadily rose, both swords coming down together to finish it off. The battle was over like that. The 10 monsters brought low. Not a single wound suffered. HMPH, Otter let out, rolling his shoulders before sheathing his blades. He then knelt down next to the corpses to examine them properly. In the flickering light, he saw enough to conclude, not white raptors. They were the same rough shape as the monsters that had been in the polar seas, and he had assumed in the darkness. Now he could see the differences, though. These were more solidly blue and with a yellowish underbelly, as opposed to the stripes of blue and white of the white raptors. They also had smaller claws on their forelegs. The average white raptor was also larger than these, although the leader of this pack was larger than the leader of the other. Clearly a different species. Otter stood and moved over to where he had noted one of the spit attacks had landed. Unlike what he had expected before, they hadn't frozen upon landing as the white raptor spit attacks did. Removing a glove, he lowered a hand to scoop some on his index finger. He focused on how it felt, and then raised to sniff at it. Then he licked at it too. He spat and wiped his finger off in the snow, remarking, "Sedative." Interesting. The ice magic had been prevalent so far, threatening to restrict movement, damage flesh, and leave one vulnerable to environmental danger. If an adventurer was hit with this, though, the risk of falling unconscious was serious, or at least losing ability to move. These monsters weren't all one note. Preliminary name, Sleep Raptor. Similar to white raptors in both bodily structure and pack tactics, but utilizes tranquilizing spit attack instead. Likely endemic too. Average individuals smaller, leaders larger, and they seemingly opt for larger packs. Ignoring the smaller ones, he moved to the leader. Pulling out a carving knife, he quickly pulled out the magic stone. As the body turned to dust, he was pleased to see a poison sac left behind. Just what he was hoping for. It quickly joined the few drops he'd chosen to carry around with him this early. The monsters of the glacier territory had been leaving more drops than usual on other floors, but that was hardly a bad thing even if he was primarily searching for a proper challenge. Otter had been smelling it for a time, but he finally judged it close enough to look up. It was a larger monster, drawn in by the gathering of potential prey. The darkness hid its face, but not the thick white fur of its body, or the shining yellow of its eyes piercing the darkness. A monstrous bear-like monster. Otter drew his broadsword and took a stance, left side forward and legs bent and wide. Hilt of the thick sword grasped in his right hand and pointed forward with the flat side held up by the back of his other fist. As Otter met its eyes and waited in that stance, the monster seemingly sensed the challenge. It stood up from all fours to its hind legs, going from at least 5 meters to 8. The move revealed limbs bare of fur and instead covered in thick, scaly armor. It then slammed the freed-up limbs into the ground, spitting on them with magic rising in the air. As it then straightened, blades of ice formed over both its forelimbs were revealed. Otter did not shift in the slightest. So, with a roar, the monster charged. Massive built-in momentum put behind one of the blades as it swung. Otter parried it, feeling the heavy weight yet mustering his own power and throwing it off. The monster stumbled, but recovered and came back in with the other hand. He parried again, but this time it threw its body behind it in a shoulder check. Otter angled his blade, catching it on the flat side and then throwing his body. Grah! The cry was the only sign of his exertion as he outright deflected and threw off the massive form that sought to slam into him. The monster was unprepared too. Helpless as right afterwards, as it found itself thrown away, a swing of his broadsword also carved through its stomach. The monster landed on its side, rolling onto its back and struggling to get back up. Otter did not make a noise this time as he came down with a single downward strike, cutting off its head and shoulder with one strike and making the ground quake from the leftover force. Snow was blasted away as if from an explosion, trees creaked, and the ground rippled. Cries of various monsters rang out as what could only be considered a localized earthquake hit. For Otter, though, everything settled as he calmly wiped his blade before sheathing it again. Preliminary name, Snow Oni. Large monster capable of both quadrupedal and bipedal movement. Able to encase forelimbs in ice blades when bipedal. Likely able to use ice magic in other ways. Strength is at least of a strong level 6. Yet, disappointing, Otter said simply. Another show that despite being filled with unique monsters a clear step above what the labyrinth territory offered, he had already outgrown this region before even arriving. He had to go deeper. He didn't say more though, instead getting to work. Not having hit the magic stone of the monster, he quickly started carving into it. He quickly pulled out the magic stone, rendering the corpse ash. He tossed the stone a good 50 meters away. This left a pile of the sleep raptors for meat and a valuable magic stone separated yet in close proximity to learn which was sought after more. Otter then jumped to latch a hand onto a branch. He effortlessly continued upwards, vaulting up and up till he reached the very top of the canopy. Alighting on a branch, he settled in to wait, observe, and strike. Tomorrow he would search for the stairs to delve deeper. Tonight, he would instead continue luring monsters. The fire had been doused by the fighting, but there were new lures. The previous attack impact had likely scared many off, but he had little doubt more would come. The dungeon's monsters were not so timid. Disappointing or not, Otter would hunt this night. When day arrived again, Otter started moving across the frozen landscape to try and track down the stairs to the 65th floor. Now in daylight, it allowed him to see more. Not just nocturnal hunters seeking prey and a dark forest. The entirety of the region. While he had entered this floor relatively close to the shore, it looked like the majority of the floor was a single large island. Large enough for small mountains to be in the center of the island, forests and frozen tundras ringing it. Made a surprising array of landscapes that few in Orario would ever have the chance to see even in the surface world. Naturally, Otter was more concerned with the monsters. Even the presence of less aggressive ones. Continuing the trend of the polar seas, there seemed to be an entire strata of monster species that were herbivores. Even more than the polar seas, since there was so much more vegetation. No longer did they primarily go from pantry to pantry. More of the crowned elks. Yet now there were also other species. What were essentially deer with prominent horns. Yak-like monsters with bushy fur. He even found a singular example of a far larger monster that was built like the raptors in having strong hind legs but ill-developed forearms, but was furred, looked more like a goat, and a massive rack of horns. He had little interest with them considering he had already decided to descend over meticulously clearing these floors as he once had, but they were still useful to note. Primarily as these prey monsters served as lures for the carnivores. The far more plentiful prey species led to commensurate increase in their hunters. Not that all of them were entirely helpless. The solitary bipedal goat monster might have seemingly been an herbivore, but that didn't make it harmless. Its size alone was a weapon, as big as the larger monsters he'd yet encountered. Its charge also proved a terrible weapon that uprooted trees and tore up the ground. Otter saw one send what looked to be an ice wyvern of some kind fleeing and wounded after a failed attack. A pack of yak monsters also was revealed to have an unexpected protector. A positively massive furred elephant monster with massive tusks and able to boat its limbs in snow as protection. He saw it protect a herd, killing another type of wyvern while slapping it out of the air with its trunk and then stomping on it. It was odd until he saw several snow-white, smaller elephant monsters mixed in with the horde. He was tempted by the massive monster, but ultimately decided that he was better off moving on. Plus, it wasn't like he didn't have other monsters that offered some brief challenge. Otter didn't even draw a weapon this time. He instead raised both hands, feeling the thick tusks of the boar monster crashing into his palms. His feet tore trenches through the ground as he was pushed back, but he didn't block. His arms shook, but held steady even as the charge of the monster slowed. Said slide also came to an abrupt end once his feet caught on a boulder large enough to endure the force. The stone cracked, but Otter's body remained firm and the monster came to a halt. He looked into the furious eyes of the boar monster that was roughly twice the height of himself, his hands now gripping onto its tusks. Grah! Otter roared back as he suddenly wrenched at its head. Its own strength failed, and it started to tip onto its side. As soon as it landed, Otter pulled and spun, pulling it across the ground. He then lifted it over his shoulders and slammed it down. Its heavy form slammed into the ground with crushing force, crushing and destroying the ground. A hand then drew a sword to stab right into its neck to end its continued struggles. He then dodged the charge of the smaller boar monster that tried to come from the side. His sword flashed out, carving deep into its side before another slice cut deep into one of its hind legs that sent it stumbling. He jumped forward to finish it off too. The other smaller boar monster cried and stamped its feet. "Come," Otter orders, putting the sword on his shoulder. He might have tried to avoid this group since it appeared a type of monster lower on the food chain, but they seemed territorial enough to attack him regardless. "An otter. I'm not generous enough to allow an enemy that attacked me to flee." Preliminary name, Power Boar. Boar monster with the expected pack structure of pack hunters so far, but otherwise extraordinary. Larger and stronger than the raptor's monsters, but no poison or ranged attack. Lower-end predator monster here. 64th floor of the dungeon Arctic tundra. The positive flood of sleep raptors eventually led Otter to divert to investigate. With how many he killed, he had no lack of tracks to follow. They eventually led him to a cave. The smell of blood and decay from inside was poignant. It was practically a lure of its own. It made him stop and take several deep breaths, sorting through the smell to parse what lay underneath. Beyond the ice and blood. "I see," he muttered as he strode inside. The cave was expansive and entirely covered in ice. It was hard to even say whether this was a natural cave so much as something a monster dug in a glacier, especially as it wasn't just one hollow, but numerous wide caverns connected by smaller tunnels. He wasn't here for such things though, and so he instead focused on the pile of sleep raptor corpses piled up. They looked to have only been slaughtered half a day ago at most, but they were already half frozen. He approached closer, but stopped several steps away. Just stared, calm, before he ducked to avoid the form that lunged from above, avoiding the leech-like mouth that had tried to swallow him up to the shoulders. His blade flashed out and carved a cut in the head, forcing it to retreat, but it was surprisingly shallow. He had to dodge to the side as the large form dropped after its failed ambush and his counterattack, the large form landing and buffeting him from the impact. His sword was raised in a guard though, and he could see the monster. It was like a wyvern, or a paluda. Its forelimbs had obvious wing strictures, but clearly too truncated to fly properly. On all fours, it was still a large monster though. It didn't have eyes, but purple streaks glowed in the dark and made it look similar. "You are intelligent," he commented stoically. This had clearly been a sleep raptor cave where they hunted the nearby pantry. This monster had just arrived and forced them out, killed plenty, and then used their corpses as lure for more monsters to come in to fall prey to it. This thing wasn't as large as some of the predators he'd yet found, but it was clearly a cannier enemy. As if in response to the failed ambush and his guard, its leech-like mouth expanded and stretched to at least twice the size before it roared in a way that made Otter's ears ache. It was by his other senses that he detected the attack from the side. From the pile of corpses, smaller leech monsters darted out at Otter. He was ready though. They had stilled when he had approached, but their scent had warned him of their presence before the mother attacked. His dual blades came out and sliced the three attacking monsters with 3 strokes. Using uneaten food as sustenance for its young too, this monster had an efficient strategy. The large monster was then on him, trying to bowl him over. He jumped over it and cut it as he passed, but it spun around with neck extending to do a sweeping attack that he had to block. An immediate counterstrike carved into its neck though, making it pay, which served as reason for it to leap straight up, spinning to land bottom down to the roof and sticking there. Its neck extended again, trying to come down and swallow Otter's upper body again. It worked just as well this time, and it only earned another cut to the head. That precipitated yet another attack shift from it. Crawling on the roof with utter ease, its tail suddenly clung to the roof like a sucker and allowed it to hand from down. The long neck allowed it to keep focused as Otter chose to start running in a circle, and balls of a malevolent dark red gas started shooting out. None got close, but the threat of ranged attacks made Otter go on the offensive this time. He jumped himself, landing foot on the ceiling. One hand grasping his sword, the other gripped a minuscule cleft that served as a handhold. His other arm lashed out, 3 cuts being carved onto the hide of the monster. It roared, and made distance as if it wasn't hanging upside down. Otter followed right after it, 3 points of contact with the ceiling more than enough to hold himself up. It allowed him to pursue the monster, attacking it even from this place it obviously wasn't used to being on the defense. The assault sent it from the roof and back to the floor, landing on its back and struggling to right itself. More than enough time for Otter to drop down too and attack its vulnerable red underbelly. If nothing else, this monster was a tough one and he was restricted from a larger attack in fear of collapsing the cave from the aftershock. It meant the monster eventually managed to right itself. He had clearly damaged its body though, and he only continued to carve into it. The monster was surprisingly fast and its movements were wide and unorthodox, but that wasn't enough. At least, till it suddenly expelled a cloud of gas from its body. Otters instinctively held his breath, but he was too close for it not to touch his skin. He immediately felt it sticking to him, trying to burn and poison him. He ignored it, but still opted to make distance over purely trusted abnormal resistance. It provided the monster a slight bit more room, which it admirably actually tried to use. It created a pulsing sack of something on the ground, which eventually spawned more of its young which tried to act as distractions. Another sack it created instead exploded into another cloud of poison when he kicked a rock at it, smell having warned him. The result was obvious though once it tried to run. Otter pursued, switching to his war hammer. The purple streaks on its tail were targeted and broken. Then he did the same to the ones on its head, which left it flailing and helpless. Clearly they served some function in its senses. Eventually he crushed its head underneath the hammer to send it twitching before it finally stilled. Preliminary name, Cave Venom Wyvern. Limited flight capabilities, but great maneuverability in caves. Seems to sense enemies by heat. Uses monster corpses as lure to more prey. Able to produce poison as projectile, area of effect, or placed mines, can extend neck in biting attack, can produce sack of young. Satisfied with the unexpected and interesting foe, he did take a moment to survey his sword. As he thought, the edge had been blunted. While it was made of high-purity adamantite and built thick to withstand his strength, the edge was harder to protect. The monsters so far had also been shockingly tough, even those that didn't have scales or shells that needed to be broken to first. It was not unusual for the dungeon to favor increasing monster strength and durability over agility. It was its more common strategy, but these flaws had very much exacerbated the problem. If he wasn't careful, eventually he'd just be swinging around a blunt metal weapon over a sword. Used to this, though, Otter merely took note and sheathed the weapon again. He then set to carve the monster, removing the magic stone and the drop. He then more comprehensively searched the cave, ensuring he didn't miss an obvious enemy worth finishing off. The last point made him come across a little discovery. Ice, yet not, he muttered as he used his hand to break through the ice covering what he was examining. The ice fell to reveal more ice, but also a different kind of ice. It was almost an ore. Not quite metallic, but as much just ice as the sacred trees of the elves was just wood. It rang some vague memories of years ago. He immediately grasped and pulled. He frowned as it held steady. Using both hands, he pulled once again. Yet again it remained steady. It proved irritatingly hard to harvest, but eventually he tore off a good piece of the ice ore. He quickly put it in his bag. He would only take this piece for now, instead collecting more once he started returning to the surface. He'd come across a few adamantite veins that he also ignored, but at least this he wanted to ensure he had a piece even if it would just weigh him down now. Otter had experienced being injured and needing to focus on returning alive too many times to not keep a small reserve of interesting finds. The pantries of these floors were quite interesting. Elsewhere in the dungeon, they were surprisingly calm. Monsters rarely attacked each other, so the hordes that gathered a pantry were surprisingly calm, ready to turn into a massive horde at the sight of mortals. In the glacier territory, they were far more dynamic, the most accessible place for nutrients. Not even the prevalence of vegetation could make up for it, and the predators even valued it since they didn't need to fight for a chance at a meal. Their seeming trained instinct to hunt each other, however, meant they were a place for conflict. Herds of herbivores would try to slip in to gain some before fleeing at the sight of predators. Any predator that set up too long soon found challenges arriving, and the sheer number of monsters coming and going meant that even with these pantries smaller than on other floors, the strength it took for a monster to dominate a pantry was no small amount. Enough that other monsters on the floor knew it better to just avoid. An alpha. That was his thought as he looked down at the pantry. Here, it was almost like a hot spring. Vents emitted steam, and water bubbled up to form colorful ponds. In this small valley, the winter that covered this landscape was beaten. Plants grew freely, and even bugs seemed to fly around. Water flowed in numerous directions, slipping between boulders and cliffs to create numerous areas where monsters would ordinarily be able to sneak in or hide from. And at the center of this ill-fitting landscape was an apex monster of the region. It vaguely resembled another monster that Otter had seen stalking pantries, seemingly ill-fitted for the cold landscape and instead sticking to pantries for food. Quadrupeds with lupine features, but with a mix of turquoise scales, white fur, tan bony spikes in various spots on its body, 2 horns, and a thick, jagged tail. He hadn't yet found reason to attack one, but he had noted they seemed to have electric magic of some kind. He was rather glad he hadn't investigated, looking at this one. Facing this one fresh would make it all the better. It was clearly an evolved specimen of some kind. Unlike the largely white and tan ones, this one was darker and had red prominent. Its smell alone felt dangerous, long instincts surfacing. Bugs seemed to gather around it. It was also looking at him. It had noted Otter's arrival quickly. Obvious, as it clearly used the lure of the pantry to bring food to it. It hadn't moved right away though, no doubt its own instincts flaring. As Otter met its eyes for a minute though, it languidly stood before tensing as it faced him. Sensing the challenge. Otter didn't smile, but he did feel the trace of what could only be excitement as he pulled out his broadsword. If Otter had to judge, he would have said the great monster he fought on the 62 end floor was a proper alpha. A roaming one, enforcing its dominance on everything in its territory. Its size and toughness was appropriate, and its array of attacks deadly. Its tail had been a weapon, and its ability to shoot an ice beam magic attack added even more danger. Otter lacked the comprehensive understanding of these flaws that he had built up in the previous ones, but he would have labeled it a level 7 monster. This beast was at least slightly stronger. Otter used a parry to help push his body out of the way as it lunged at him with a foreleg swinging out. It got him out of the way of the bulky form surging forth, but the monster seamlessly shifted into a spin that sent its large tail right at him. He dived over it though. Once again using the blade to guide him with a parry, he landed right as the monster's head came around. He tried to stab at its eyes, but a simple tilt of its head made the blade skid along the bony plates protecting its face and head. Its forelimb came right back again, but this time Otter darted into its guard to shoulder check its chest. He also landed a hilt blow right into less armored chest. The blows landed flush, and Otter refused to relent either. As it tried to push back, he gathered his strength and kept pushing. Despite being twice as tall as him and 5 times longer, his strength proved superior as the monster was knocked onto its back. Yet Otter's attacks afterwards failed to seriously wound it. It instead managed to regain its feet, and another rapid spin had to be blocked. It sent Otter sliding back, muscles tensed as the monster had also covered itself in an electric coating that went through his blade into his body. It tried to lunge with another swipe of its claws, but he forced his body to move regardless of the shock and jumped out of the way. The monster followed. Unlike many of the other larger monsters which were more cumbersome, besides dashing or charging attacks, this one was outright agile. It expertly jumped from boulders and cliffs after Otter, its weight almost not mattering as it pursued. Otter was still faster, and so he had time to chant. Sterling compassion, golden plains. It is my fate to serve as a brute of war. Run through, carrying divine will of the goddess. Otter couldn't concurrent chant, so he had to stop when chanting. It allowed the monster a chance to attack him despite his superior speed. Yet, he judged it still the right choice as its armor was quite strong. He'd destroy any weapon that he swung with enough force to cut through. His spell damaged his weapons, but less than what without it would mean. The monster naturally took advantage, and attacked. Yet Otter was ready, with feet planted. Every shot was deflected. A mere grunt let out as Otter held his defense firm. The monster sensed as golden energy started surrounding Otter, and retreated. It then howled, and the red glowing bugs of the area suddenly started flying towards it. In but seconds, a cloud of lights were gathered right over the monster's back spikes and head. It seemed to breath in and the lights went into it, and then it spun. 4 red orbs of energy that headed straight towards Otter. Otter cut each of them with his blade, trusting even the immature spell to protect him. Hildy's Vidash, yet Otter tensed and stopped chanting as he felt the energy flow and stick to him. He also felt its effect. It wasn't like a poison, but he felt it affix and dampen the gathering magic power. Even Ignis Fatuus avoided as it stifled the magic. Anti-magic? Otter asked as he jumped away to make some distance. No, it wasn't that. Otter had felt such before. This was less negation as suppression, an opposing element that overpowers gathering magic or elements. Otter glared anew at the monster, which had not wasted the distance he had made. Over-attacking, it was seemingly charging more of that power. It was glowing with red lightning, and it then glared at him. Otter raised the blade by instinct to block as a lightning bolt shot down on him, but it failed to prevent the conducting of the strike. Otter's body locked up again as red lightning danced across his skin. His skin was scorched and seared even as it tried to paralyze him. He forced himself to move regardless as more bolts came down. He was soon darting around, a mere step ahead of the red lightning shooting down on him. He avoided any more, but the fading of the first strike only made clear that this wasn't just lightning. He felt something else lingering in the aches and pains, burning. The lightning had the same element infused in it, and this time it was quite painful. Not even E-rank magic resistance enhanced by Stortus Otter completely blocked it. Otter could ignore pain though, as shown by his reacting as the monster darted back in. He jumped over the swipe that landed and collapsed the cliff he'd been on, but his hand clasped onto the spikes on its back. Pulling himself onto it, and hand dropped and pulled out one of the spikes he kept at his waist. Said spike was soon driven into its back, palm then driving it in further. He then drew the war hammer, intending to hammer it in. The bugs that had previously absorbed into the monster suddenly emerged though, revealing the horns and bones of the monster were porous. They moved right at Otter, and he couldn't dodge them in time. As soon as they landed, he was suddenly buffeted by small explosions that burned and stung even more from whatever energy they were using. Seeing more pouring out, he jumped while spinning the hammer with all his strength. His hammer smashed through and broke the bones on the monster's back even as the bugs ignited to unleash an explosion that sent him flying through the air. Otter still corrected midair and landed. He had newly burned and scuffed skin, but he was not so easily downed. Even the element burning was ignorable. Stortus Otter was healing him faster than it inflicted more damage. Chip damage was all but useless on Otter unless the opponent had regeneration of its own. He met the gaze of the monster as it turned towards him, clearly enraged at the damage done to its protection on its back. Otter raised the warhammer in response, calling it to come forward, preventing an easy victory by suppressing his magic. Guess he would have to shatter this thing's armor the old-fashioned way. And that was what he just did. The monster was fierce, and had many different movements to utilize its varied body parts in attacks. It ultimately was just too slow through, and lacked anything that Otter couldn't endure. Its armor also failed piece by piece. One leg, and then the other was stripped bare. The horns on its head were cracked and broken as hammer blow after hammer blow connected. Its tail was partially cut, and Otter then just tore it off entirely as he swung it around at some point. The battle was ended when he finally managed to drive a spike right into its neck to pierce its spine. Preliminary name, Blood Lightning Wolf. Alpha. A powerful monster capable of utilizing red lightning infused with some other element that can suppress other elements and further enhance attacks. Heavily armored. Strongest monster yet encountered. Solid level 7 monster. Symbiotic relationship with local bugs. He then harvested the drop before moving on. Exploring the pantry that was currently empty, anything with sense driven away by their battle. The landscape was altered no small bit too. Otter was more interested in the bugs though. Bugs as small as these weren't exactly a thing elsewhere in the dungeon. More important were the red ones that seemed filled with the element that monster had utilized. He had to keep a distance from the glowing red bugs since they exploded last time, but merely watching for several minutes guided him to something of interest. Berries. Otter grabbed some of the berries and held them up. They were a pulsing red. He squished one to feel its juices on his fingers and then took a quick lip. He quickly spat it out. He did not know what this was, but it was not to be eaten. Almost like the fruit he'd been subsiding on, but even worse. At least that was just a matter of cold. Ice element was just a matter of temperature. It wasn't poison in the same way acid wasn't poison. Still, he sighed and made sure to collect a good number. He then properly prepared them, wrapped them up in cloth. He was still more intent on seeing how deep he could dive before he truly started to explore what these floors offered. But this, like the ice ore, was interesting enough to ensure he got some. The pantries might offer things beyond a great deal of monsters, if only certain things could grow there compared to the rest of the icy landscape. 65th floor of the dungeon, it was a whale. A flying whale. Although, even the concept of a flying whale was doing it a disservice. It was out at sea, beyond the shore of the island. Further than any attempt by Otter to travel further resulted in him inexplicably being turned back around again. Yet, it was large enough that it was easy to see it. Multiple fins. Its mere presence even seemed to light the sky up with blue auroras. Thankfully, no legs or arms. Otter could only stare from the shore. The monster seemed to sense it. Dozens of eyes opened on the side of it closer to the island, and he could sense its gaze on him. It made his instincts rise, and his hand grip a weapon hard enough for his own bones to bend. If it attacked, it felt like it would be a foe beyond any he had faced. Yet, the monster seemingly didn't find him of interest as the eyes closed and the whale let out a low call that echoed through the air. It then descended from the air, slipping into the sea seamlessly. In an instant, it was gone and it seemed half a dream. Yet, that dream seemed to bring to mind an old memory. I don't even entertain any suggestions by the meathead to attack it. I remember that fella down there being around long before any of these babies were born. I suspect I'll continue seeing it long after everyone else is gone too. So, don't get any ideas, little pig dash. It was an unpleasant memory he shut down, but he still stayed there for a time in solemn silence. Sometimes the dungeon truly was mysterious. More than even the battle with the blood lightning wolf, this battle was one of sheer, unadulterated power. It seemed Otter's decision to not fight the furred elephant before wouldn't deprive him of the chance. The 65th floor had the largest mountain of the tundra, and instinct had guided him right up it. He just knew the stairs to do down further lay at the top, paradoxically. And at the top, very much near the stairs, he had found an even larger and more ferocious elephant monster. Not to mention a monster as large as any of the monster rexes. One that was also territorial, no doubt claiming the peak of the mountain that overlooked the entire floor, and attacked him as soon as it detected him. Hildy's Vini already had engulfed his broadsword in golden energy, and he lashed out to defend himself from the assault coming at him. He cut a thick ball of ice thrown at him, and let off a shockwave that tore through the following snowstorm. It blew out its trunk at him. He followed it up with a dash that put him in the air right before it, swinging down. The monster jerked its head, catching the blow with its battle-scarred tusk. Otter then had to use a hand to catch at it. Tried to skewer him, maneuvering his body around it before jumping back. One of Otter's dual blades had broken. He'd also already slammed 3 spikes into the monster's body. Yet, it kept going. Its thickly armored skill was impenetrable, and this specimen was able to coat its legs and sides in thick ice over just snow. Its trunk was covered in ice that turned it into a weapon, and sheer size allowed it to shrug off what damage it had yet received. Yet, it was a great battle. The Blood Thunder Wolf had been faster and had more surprises, but this beast was just pure strength and force. A foe that was only second to the Bela in terms of a complete and utter refusal to fall. It was also striking back. Even with Otter's speed, he couldn't avoid the area of effect. He couldn't even count the number of times he'd been forced to shatter ice that had sought to swallow him in this blizzard. From its attacks, the accumulated damage was there, but he too refused to fall. The monster lifted its trunk, and this time sucked inwards with such pressure that there was nothing he could do as his form was lifted and pulled towards it. So he merely attacked as he went in, cutting deep into its trunk before its tusk caught him in the side and slammed him into rock-hard ice. As soon as the tusk pulled back, though, he emerged by jumping at it. Another attack that landed on its armored head. The mountain shook with each blow he unleashed, the clash of his blade echoing far and wide. The monster's own responses were just as momentous. Its activity had heralded a blizzard to start up, and its roars and steps trumpeted through the howling blizzard and shattered ice of the mountain. They had battled from one side of the battle to another, ice caves collapsing behind them and entire makeshift trails of monsters disappearing. In the end, it wasn't too unexpected what eventually came. The shaking of the mountain from neither of them, and a roar of inestimable amounts of mass falling. Otter looked up to see the wave of ice and snow barreling down on them, an avalanche sparked by their battle. Otter jumped as the wave arrived, jumping over the first impact that caught the monster. It roared and trumpeted as even its great bulk was slowly pushed towards the steep slope of the mountain, a force that Otter too felt when he landed, and was struggling to no be swept in it too. The sheer mass of snow alongside the softness of it prevented just about anything to jump off of. Otter lashed out with the remaining power of Hildy's Vini to cut the avalanche before him, allowing him just enough time to jump again. The monster finally failed its battle to resist, and went over the ledge and let out a furious cry as it started falling properly. Otter needed to worry about himself though. Himself and the stairs. He quickly used his honed sense of direction to head towards where he remembered it being. He was proven correct, although as he watched the avalanche reach the opening to bury it in snow, he could only continue jumping and struggling in the direction, combating the force of the avalanche trying to swallow and bring him down the mountain. Otter dived right into the snow. The avalanche finally settled. An explosion of golden light rang out, blowing the settled snow away. He was obviously the culprit, arms sweeping out to throw snow off him. Behind him, the entryway to the stair. Having prevented the stairs from sealing behind him, Otter finally had a moment as it was clear the avalanche was over. He heard the faint roar of the monster coming from deep below, and he looked down towards where it no doubt was. Unsurprisingly, a mere avalanche wasn't going to kill a foe like that. He was tempted to start downwards to finish the fight. He knew he would end up winning if the fight was pressed to its finish. Yet, Otter looked at his blade and frowned. His broadsword was not in great condition, its edge notched and dulled. One of his dual blades was gone. 3 of his 6 spikes were now lodged in that thing's body. Everything he was carrying was showing the signs of wear. If he finished that battle, he wasn't even sure if he could continue with his equipment. Next time, he decided, looking down where the trumpeting call rang out. Next time. Preliminary name, Ice-Crowned Mammoth. An alpha example of the ice mammoth. Present on the 65th floor, dominating the upper reaches of the mountains with the stairs to the 66th, largest monster yet encountered. Survived first encounter and still active. Forced to accept the unsatisfactory finish, Otter turned to the stairs that started downwards. He had least wanted to reach the 66th floor on this delve. With that thought, he started descending. The stairs were disturbingly dark, but his senses could still pierce it. There was nothing he could do about how far down the stairs went, though. He was climbing down long enough that he ended up taking a quick 2 hours to nap before finishing it. 66th floor of the dungeon, there was a reason the 66th floor was his minimum goal upon deciding to descend as deep as he could. It was the final region of the glacier territory. Beyond it, one could argue nothing remained. The 70th floor was a safe floor. The 71st floor had been a secret that had stymied the Zeus and Hera familiars for centuries. He did not know what could do that, but he wouldn't underestimate it. There was the 66th and 69th floors that offered the lowest proper floors. The Arctic Mountains, and the name was self-explanatory. The air was thin, and a blanket of clouds were visible below. More above too. The sheer mountains seemed to punch through both. Otter emerged to find himself at the edge of a cave that emerged on the face of a sheer cliff. There was literally nothing before him. No path or avenue remained. All that could be done was climb or jump. It wasn't hard to see why this was the region that even Zeus and Hera had given up on bringing supporters and wagons. The terrain was too much for transport by anyone that wasn't a high-leveled adventurer. Even a level 4 would be nothing but a burden here, needing to be literally carried. This was an area solely for their executives and elite warriors. Otter looked around, and then jumped. The Arctic mountains truly weaponized the terrain and cold. The blizzard that had come in with the monster attack ruined any sense of sight. Even Otter couldn't see more than several meters in front of him, and the wind howled in a way that drowned out the howls of the monsters. Then there was the fact that he was fighting on the side of a mountain that was as much cliff as not. In one hand his remaining dual blade was drawn, while the other grasped onto handholds to prevent him from falling from the height he was falling. But he could handle it. The monka-like monster jumped at him from above, and Otter effortlessly maneuvered into a new position while slicing it in half. He did the same to the next that tried to do the same, as well as the ice that was being thrown at him by the monsters. An experiment had already shown the ice exploded and frozen whatever it connected to. He had to jump as the far larger ones slammed into his previous position, shattering the rock. His hand caught a new handhold though, and he swung right back at the monster. His blade sunk into its chest, but it immediately tried to take a chunk of his neck. Otter's free hand came up, catching its jaw. His legs were squeezing together to hold himself up even as the monster tried to use the removal of the hand to send him plummeting. Sword in its chest, it still maneuvered and tried to throw him off the mountain cliff. Otter's strength prevailed though, and he twisted the sword in its chest. When it reared back in pain, his other hands drew his hatchet and lodged it in its eye with a swing. 3 more such strikes followed in an instant, destroying its face utterly. Wrenching, it was the monster that was thrown off as Otter hung down, only his feet gripping the cliff. He barely had time before new monsters arrived. Flying wyverns. Small, but unhindered by the fierce winds or snow. They swooped down, launching attacks at him or trying to pull him off the cliff to drop him. Such proved to be the usual case of the floor. It wasn't that the monsters were necessarily stronger, even if he was sure he heard some deep roars that indicated larger monsters and alphas. No, it was just the terrain. It was about being attacked while climbing sheer mountains. Honestly, even if it wasn't blizzarding, level 6 without exceptional agility basic abilities and precision of movement would be better off staying in the Arctic tundra than trying to fight in this terrain and weather. With the blizzard, anyone not level 7 wouldn't likely survive without finding the flattest spot they could and bunkering down till it passed. Probably still better to do so, unless one was seeking a challenge. Otter was seeking a challenge. He started jumping, his strength and agility allowing him to traverse immense distances with each one. Mountain after mountain was moved. Flying monsters tried to pluck him out. Other harassed him when he landed. All expected, and all fell. A gust of wind as he prepared to jump again made him halt though. His eyes narrowed as he tried to see through the blizzard. He could see the vague shape of the mountain he had been aiming for. It was filled with rocks that were covered in snow from the blizzard. He stayed watching for a minute. Sensing his awareness, the mountain shifted. The rocks started moving. All separately. 1,000 man-sized forms started moving, their camouflage of a rocky mountain fading away. Insectoid versions of flame rocks. Entire colonies too that could cover large parts of the mountain. When settled, all one could see was the spiky rocks that covered their backs. Grunting, Otter jumped right at them. The blizzard lasted a full day, and it was as harsh a day as Otter had in years. Yet, it did pass. The sky cleared to an almost shocking degree, truly illustrating the heights of the mountains, the valleys that lay below. Monsters were visible too, the numerous flying ones that skimmed mountains in the distance. Monkeys and larger monsters climbing and jumping. Even the valleys seemed to be havens for life, even if Otter hadn't yet descended to explore them. Even if this region's floors didn't increase in diameter compared to the Arctic tundra, the addition of height as a dimension would no doubt make it feel larger. One could and would have to go up and down numerous sheer mountains if to traverse it. Crevices and valleys made so many extra little spots that could be explored or hide monsters. Not to mention caves, such as the one he landed before after spotting it in the new visibility. He smelled many scents from inside. It was clear that many monsters were inside. Yet, once again a niggle of a memory arose despite his attempt to stamp down on it. The cave's there, even for me, you. Otter frowned as he considered why he was remembering such things, although eventually justified it as old memories due to the new flaws he hadn't heard anything about since 15 years ago. Still, at least this time it was a useful memory. The Hero familia had avoided the caves of the Arctic mountains. It didn't mean they feared them, but there had to be a reason. Something inside was enough for the entirety of that troublesome familia to hand off such areas entirely to the Zeus familia members. Rolling his shoulder, he walked in. Reason or not, Otter had to forge forward himself. The cave wasn't so different from the ice caverns of the Arctic tundra, although this one definitely had rock beneath the ice. It extended just as deep to make clear this wasn't a natural cave though. Either monsters did this, or the dungeon had some reason to allow adventurers to go deep inside. The attack came quite suddenly. Otter was still ready, Scent having warned him. Not to mention the familiarity of the attack. The monster had crawled across the roof of the cavern with surprising stealth, using the darkness and making very little noise. The way it clung to the roof by its tail and neck extended to try and swallow his upper body in the opening strike was all but the same. The scent was too moist for the cave venom wyvern, but the attack was the same. Ducking and rolling away from the leech-like mouth, Otter struck back. The war hammer struck its head, and discombobulated it enough for it to plummet from the floor. Otter struck it again hard enough to throw it against the floor, but it still recovered. It indeed wasn't the cave venom wyvern. This one was white, and stood on its hind legs more. Its skin was also moist and slimy. Its head was also more round than flat. Otter quickly judged it wasn't more dangerous though. It wasn't smaller than some of the monsters he'd faced, and its skin lacked the armor to break first to kill. It made him put away the warhammer in favor of pulling out his remaining dual sword. Of course, his judgment of its threat didn't prevent it from attacking. Its hind legs bunched and it jumped at him. Over-rolling away, Otter instead struck back. His blade carved into its chest, and he put his shoulder first to absorb the impact. The monster was the one to recoil from the impact, mass not overcoming Otter's firmness. He had to duck as its head shot forward to try and bite into him again. His other hand rose up to grab it, latching on despite its slippery surface. It still allowed him to pull it in to stab his sword deeper into its chest. The monster struggled, but Otter was the one winning the struggle for positioning, until Otter heard a suctioning noise, and saw that the monster's tail had latched onto the ground. He then felt electricity start flowing as the monster released a burst of lightning from its body. Otter's body locked up from the attack, teeth gritted. The pain was minimal though, his magic resistance showing itself. The monster did not miss the opportunity though, and this time Otter was too close to evade entirely. Sword buried in its chest, he could only raise his free arm to block as it tried to bite his head to engulf him. That round mouth latched onto the limb in an instant though, new lightning now flowing through its teeth into Otter. In an instant, feeling started to fade in his arm. Not entirely though, not with Stortus Otter. Grah! Instead, Otter powered through. Regardless of the electricity locking his muscles, he moved. The mouth engulfing his arm to the shoulder became a handhold. He just spun, and tensed his arm as lifted and slammed down the monster. It let out a cry, but held on. Otter lifted and slammed it again. Then again. Finally the monster was wounded enough to let go, releasing a saliva-covered arm as it flew to impact a wall. It tried to run then, but Otter had little intent on allowing that. Inside a minute, he finished cutting off the thing's head with his blade. A mistake, he admitted aloud, looking at his arm. It was positively covered in a slimy saliva that tried to burn, but failed against his skin. There were numerous smaller wounds, however, where its teeth had made small cuts. Minor. Still the result of underestimating an enemy he assumed to be too much like a previous monster. With the battle over and Stortus Otter stopping its enhancement of his abnormal resistance DA, the poison that had clearly been in its saliva started setting in deeper. He was able to resist any systemic effects of the now clear, paralyzing sedative, but his entire arm was turning numb. Still, he would survive. So, he continued moving deeper into the cave. The airflow provided enough scent to make clear more remained deeper in. Many more monsters. Eventually he found what he was searching for. It was an unexpected sight. Multiple plants glowing in the dark, finally allowing enough sight for those without Otter's senses to see properly. The cave was also centered around in Cave River. More phosphorescent plants within the water. The colors in the water told Otter the answer. A pantry. It wasn't just on the surface of the mountains that monsters roamed. They spawned and lived inside the mountains too. Mountains partially hollowed out by tunnels and caved, this pantry ensuring some level of innate nutrition and sustainability. Considering the harshness of the terrain and weather, such an area protected from that could be considered boon hunting grounds. Although it was likely that traveling the surface was quicker if one knew the location of and sought the stairs deeper. Still, why avoid it? Otter's thoughts came to a halt when he felt his arm twitch. He looked down at it. The wounded arm, still numb. Even numb, however, he was glaring now. It twitched again. Otter raised it even as his other hand pulled out his carving knife, and he stabbed it into his arm. The numbness was enough that he didn't even feel it. Not that it would have stopped him. He dug until he saw a flash of white. His hand shot into his own self-inflicted wound, grabbing and searching. He then pulled. The white leech-like thing came out, squirming and crying. Otter squished it in his hand. That bite. It injected a lava of itself. The paralyzing poison then masked the feeling, with the young no doubt pulling out more. To something that succumbed to its poison entirely, they'd be helpless as the larvae ate them from the inside out and grew. How unpleasant. As Otter searched to ensure that another wasn't in his arm, he was attacked. Shooting out of the water, multiple tentacles latched onto the bloody limb. Otter found himself wrenched towards the water as they then pulled, but he managed to find his footing first. His other hand reached out and grabbed one tentacle too, and now he pulled. It felt like wrenching something suctioned to the riverbed, probably was, but he managed it. A large form was pulled from the water with a large wave resulting. Immediately, more tentacles shot out at Otter, latching into every part of him as it now tried to pull itself to him. Mouth opening wide with ovipositor extending. Otter's hands had found his remaining dual sword and hatchet though, and he was slashing. Even his wounded arm didn't move the slightest bit slower. Tentacles went flying and ovipositor cut off. Then its body started to be carved up. A flurry of cuts that eviscerated the many-limbed monster that had tried its underwater ambush. The attack had only served as a signal. Otter heard the sound of wings flapping, as bug monsters started flying at him. Others arrived too. Otter started chanting. Sterling compassion, golden plains. It is my fate to serve as a brute of war. Run through, carrying divine will of the goddess. Hildes Vini. By the time the monsters arrived, his weapons were coated in a coat of golden energy. Each blow started unleashing waves of the magic, tearing through multiple monsters each time. The wave of monsters crashed against Otter's immovable defense. And broke. Otter looked at the floor covered in monster parts, frown on his face. They weren't overly dangerous foes, even in such numbers. Maybe to someone lesser, but not to him. It was hard to hide his distaste though. He had seemingly discovered by the Hero Familia avoided the caves of these floors. It wasn't from the monsters being overly powerful. It was that they all apparent had some combination of being slimy, tentacles, ovipositors, paralyzing poison, tried to lay eggs or larvae in paralyzed foes, and other things of that nature. It didn't take much to guess why an all-female familiar had opted to not walk into caves filled with such. Otter set back towards where he smelled fresh air flowing from. Ultimately, Otter continued till he found the stairs down deeper, but then decided to turn back and start ascending again. His hatchet had broken in the caves, and his remaining dual sword and broadsword were chipped and blunted. Only the warhammer was arguably still in acceptable state. Combined with finally taking wounds and his rations having run out even with supplanting them with the dungeon fruits, it very much left him on the edge of his logistical capacity. Next time. This delve had been far from useless. Besides the few fights more than worthy of a delve, the information gained was priceless. He now knew what to expect from these flaws. He had also learned of the location of the stairs. When he returned, he could cover the glacier territory to this point in half the time, with more weapons, better weapons, and less distractions on the floors. Next time, Otto repeated aloud as he forced himself to turn over, pushing further. Next time to the 70th floor, and whatever mystery the 71st floor offered that had served as the wall for Zeus and Hera. Lowest floor of dungeon yet reached. 66th floor had a busy few days, so couldn't get this out even if it had been 80% written. Hope you like it though. Not sure whether I'll be updating this or alphin this weekend, but I'll try for one. Really started to explore some of what I've added to flesh out Shakti here. Also, as I saw a few of you had reviews with questions. OBE run, you didn't have a question, but thanks for the long review and I'm not too bothered by lack of interest. This is a pretty niche story type. I had other ideas that likely would have been more popular, but I'm quite enjoying this. Torres Juan 010, this is third person, using he a him or she her. I do first person for a fic I have on SB, but stuck with third person for this one. Not sure if I like it better, but whatever. Otherwise, thanks for the words. As for my writing advice, figure out your own style. I like world building and detail. A lot of great writers focus on other things. Insane Makaishin, yes, I made up the ice fruit. While the dungeon has fruit canonically in it, we haven't even been shown the glacier territory in canon, so I rather have to fill it out. Fruit worked for story and didn't clash, so I added it. Also, since I see you left a few reviews in Is It Wrong, Tsubaki is stronger than Frine, but Ishtar has numbers. Hephaestus has 50 plus high-class adventurers, level 2 or higher, with 20 or so as level 3. Ishtar has 100 plus high-class with most at level 3. There's also that Hephaestus does less expeditions. Note, however, that no one wants to mess with creators of magic swords. Tsubaki stalled Gareth easily when she let loose. I corrected Itha to having 2 strong level 4s as captain and vice-captain. This is before Bell, but there's plenty of time between Bell's arrival and Great Feud. I can say I have had many ideas on Great Feud ideas, but not this one. Not sure about Alan reaching level 7 within a year of reaching level 6, but I can say it is disappointing that basically anyone older than Ai's generation hasn't leveled up in the 7 years since the Grand Feud. After a full day spent on the 50th floor, they finally started on the most challenging part of their dive. Shakti's spear cut through every black rhino that dared show itself as before, where she stood right at the bottom of the stairs from the 50th floor. Their thick hides demanding proper weapons, Ilta handled the other monsters arriving with her fists. Ligan joined Shakti in her culling of the big ones, while Ladako helped Ilta clean up. It was just the 4 of them at the stairs from the 50th floor, cutting down the monsters, calm and patient as they waited for every monster in sight to come at them while roaring. They stayed the same as the nearby walls cracked and birthed new monsters. Even when monsters from further away started flowing in, drawn by the roars and sound of combat. The initial local area was cleared up, but the monsters continued coming in a trickle, and the trickle soon became a flood. Once monsters were coming from all available directions, Shakti yelled up the stairs, "Rihanna, now!" Within seconds, noise started coming down the stairs. The 4 of them moved to the sides, pairing up on either side, protecting themselves, but leaving the entrance of the stairs open, which soon had a stampede of monsters emerge, several black rhinos at front but followed by a good number of fomois and even a power bull. The work of the day of delay. The familiar's monster taming skills put to full use. Monsters from the 49th floor forcefully beaten and tamed, and even a few quick ventures to the 51th floor, netting them some black rhinos to serve as the meat behind their impromptu stampede. As the confused, tamed monsters ran right into their fellows, the rest of the expedition force followed and Shakti yelled out while leading, down the left corridor. The rush of monsters created chaos in the approaching enemies. Bowled over by the tamed monsters fed magic stones that both enhanced their strength temporarily and put them into a state where they could be tamed. Ganesha members guiding the stampede while reaping the toll on the knocked down and injured monsters left in its wake. It was a move that broke the encirclement, allowing them to leave the congregated enemy force behind. It was also a fully temporary move. The enemy monsters were soon inflicting wounds on and bringing down the tamed ones. As the tamed monsters decreased in number and the enemy before them soon outnumbered the Ganesha members, whips and commands failed. Old instincts reasserting. Not hesitating, Shakti led the way by thrusting her spear right through the back neck of one of the tamed black rhinos before it turned and continued without a pause. Keep moving to the stairs to the 52nd floor, she ordered as she leaned away from several swipes of a black rhino, ducked a lunge of silver worm, before countering to slice them up. Don't get bogged down. The 51st floor was good for being able to kill hordes of enemies without risk from the Valgang dragon, but also little else if your goal was to delve. It was just an area to clear. In that, thankfully, their strategy worked perfectly, drawing all the monsters to the same point before punching through with a stampede of sacrificial monsters half-tamed. Their way was clear, only needing to cut through the monsters as they spawned in their way. The dungeon floors were well over twice the size of Orario this deep, but the labyrinth territory was thankfully one where the stairs down were all relatively centered. If one wanted to explore the entirety of the floors, it would take weeks. If one just sought to descend, the time frame turned to hours. The 52nd floor. There was little difference, right away. The same monsters blocking the way. Shakti ensuring she was front and center, leading the way through the bulk of the enemy, pushing herself to go faster and faster to keep their pace up. Yet it was impossible to avoid monsters coming up the rear or the flanks at each intersection, making it inevitable that eventually someone would be sniped. Shakti! Ilta yelled when she ducked a shot of spider web. It was just one of three, however. The other two continued on, catching onto two of the supporters. Everyone's eyes shifted to the man-sized spiders. Deformous spiders. Watch out, Shakti yelled, everyone bracing as beams of white-hot fire consumed their sight in one direction. The dungeon itself was torn through, the floor shaking. It made it easy to miss as the deformous spiders leapt back, uncaring of how they were consumed by the flames so long as they pulled the supporters forward into the giant hole that remained as the fire died down. Shakti still noticed, and threw herself after them to barely snag the large packs of the two supporters. She ended up holding them both in the open air as her feet were right at the edge. Grasping them, Shakti found herself staring down at the massive hole that now went straight to the 58th floor. Just what they had been waiting for. Down, down, down. Shakti yelled as she heard screeches of ill wyverns rising from the depths. The 54th floor. Ilta was the first that ran past Shakti, swan-diving into the hole. Shakti grunted as she lifted the two supporters, throwing them backwards where they were caught. She then dived herself. The rest of the group followed, although not all at the same time. Shakti was scanning downwards. Watching Ilta lead the way, the Amazon grinning madly as dark flying forms rose up to meet their falling group. Ill wyverns, their mouths opening with gathering fire. Ilta's grin widened as she faced the fire, her arm pulling back. Shakti only ordered, Tamana. The level 4 was ready, chant already done. Duality shelter. The light of her magic covered Ilta, two separate currents of red and blue light forming an immaterial yet supremely protective embrace. Ilta was consumed by the breath attacks of 3 wyverns. Yet she came out the other side with grin and body untouched, unleashing a punch right into the skull of one of the wyverns while crying out, Oya! The skull all but exploded before her fist, the wyvern going limp. Also serving as a platform for Ilta to plant her feet to jump off of from towards a new wyvern. This one once again tried to consume her in flames, but failed just as much. It tried to use its long neck to dodge, but Ilta still landed her blow on its body. Scales shattered and ribs clearly cracked before her fist, and she latched on with her fingers to pull herself in. The second blow sent this wyvern falling too. Ha ha, I always love this, Ilta declared as she jumped at a new wyvern. I don't have to defend at all. Eager violence. One of Ilta's 2 skills. It enhanced her attack power the more she abandoned any guard or caution for offense, with defense and fear nullifying it, which paired perfectly here with duality shelter. Tamana's magic spell provided protection from heat and cold for 5 minutes to those it was applied to. A third-rate defensive spell most of the time, not providing any protection from physical attacks or magic attacks of any other element. Too situational. In situations like this, facing enemies like wyverns which attacked with fire, or the Molta from before. Priceless. Shakti had her own enemies, however. She threw her spear, impaling one through the eye, and she landed on its body as it started to plummet. She grabbed the shaft and jumped onto another with 3 swings carving through its neck. A wyvern managed to catch her with fire, but a spinning of her spear defended and dissolved the barrage of fireballs. Eventually realizing the uselessness of their flames against either of them, one came lunging at Shakti with large, teeth-filled mouth open. A palm strike met its lower jaw to slam its jaws shut, and a sweeping slash sent it tumbling down. "Captain, Vice Captain," a voice came from above. Shakti looked up to see that the others had done what was planned. Rihanna had used her bow to embed several arrows in the walls, each with ropes attached. It allowed everyone in the party to halt their fall. Without the harassment of the wyverns either, they were able to move into one of the opening on the side, on the 54th floor. The others safe, Shakti exchanged a glance and nod with Ilta. More wyverns were already coming up, but the two jumped. They landed on the walls, and used it as a leaping point. Unlike the level 4s that needed the rope, they were easily able to use sheer physical capabilities and what handholds were available to climb back up the 50 meters to the 54th floor. They landed on the ground of the hallway. To the first intersection, Shakti ordered as she moved. 2 snake leaped at her. Her spear caught the thunder snake in the mouth, and she punched the silver worm away. Once they were there, she ordered, "Damage the walls." Several of the supporters started on that, but a call came as well. Wyverns trying to crawl into the hallway. Remaining supporters block it with Tamana, Shakti responded. It might be scary to face down fire-breathing wyverns that filled an entire hallway, but they were the best opponents for the level 4s. "Great, block off that route," Shakti ordered. The orders kept on coming. Everyone had a job. The walls needed to be damaged to ensure no monsters spawned amongst them. The wyverns from the Vangang Dragon Pit killed and held back. A good 3 other routes needed handled. Still, despite the seeming threats on all sides, this was where they hunkered down. The longer they fell, the more wyverns they would have had to deal with. Skipping all the floors would also have allowed the dungeon to put all its gathered energy into trapping them there. The 58th floor was a wide-open cavern, after all. Compared to the labyrinth where they could funnel enemies into several narrow approaches, the 58th floor was as bad as the Motora when it came to being surrounded by entire hordes. No, the Ganesha familiar had long since found that the holes blown through the floors by the Valgang dragons were better to drop but several floors. It allowed distance to be covered, but kept it controlled. They could move multiple floors quickly, but then bunker down. Cull the monsters and strain the ability of the dungeon to spawn more. The Valgang dragons also had a cooldown period between their attacks. To drop to the 54th floor and then climb back up was the usual operation of the Ganesha familiar in these floors. Well, when Shakti didn't prefer to have them grind on the 51st floor. 51st floor to 54th and then climbing back up was a limited rotation that nonetheless exposed them to all the dangers of these floors. With a full expedition camped on the 50th floor, they could often do it for days without supply fears. The only time they had reached the 58th was when they coincidentally had several Freyr executives fighting ahead of them, thus partially clearing the way. And now they needed to do it themselves before going deeper. The thought made Shakti pause and take another deep breath to center herself, but then a call went out, "Venom Scorpion." Shakti immediately moved to the route that called that, facing the 2-meter-tall scorpion monster. It was snapping its large claws while its stinger also waved in the air. Numerous bug eyes glared at them with hatred. Shakti threw her spear again, the blade stabbing into the joint of chitin between the stinger and tail segment. The monster shrieked, but she was the one to run forward first. Stinger hindered by her spear, it snapped at her with lightning-fast claws. She had to duck and weave between them, finally jumped over to land on top of its body. She grabbed the haft of her dangling spear before jumping up further. Dragging the spear with her, the blade tore through even more of its tail. She landed feet first on the wall, jumping right back in. A final attack removing the stinger. The monster remained alive, angry too, but fell. Arrows shot into its eyes. Spear thrusts following as its vision failed. Its thick chitin shell kept its main body protected for a time, but failed utterly to prevent its limbs from being lost one by one. Venom scorpions were one of the more dangerous monsters, but still failed before any coordinated assault once their stingers were removed. "I'll harvest its poison," Tamana called as the monster fell. "No, leave it," Shakti ordered though, drawing a surprised look. "Not our priority this time." The venom of the monster was actually a highly valued material, and one neither the Freya nor Loki familiars usually focused on. The venom scorpion's poison was such that it could greatly harm even someone with abnormal resistance ranked F. It just wasn't as well known as poison vermis or polluter because it was deeper than those two, and it just wasn't a monster well designed to deliver it. Their stingers were so large that even without the poison, a strike had a chance to be fatal. It made avoiding being hit and removing the stinger literally the first move against them. Harvesting the poison also required E-ranked abnormal resistance, far above the G rank often deemed sufficient. Knowledge on how to harvest poison being lacking in most frontline warriors also hardly needed to be mentioned. Yet, it was an essential ingredient in the highest quality detoxicant antidotes, thus lucrative if you could. Ganesha Familia also had an alternative reason: raising abnormal resistance. While an unpleasant process, controlled exposures was the best method for such. Without venom scorpion poison, one had to rely on strengthened basilisk, poison vermis, or polluter concoctions which added more variables. Their taming meant the familiar members were often exposed to irregulars, which frequently developed new or enhanced abilities, and so held a higher standard for abnormal resistance. But not this time. We won't burden ourselves with drops or materials at this point, Shakti clarified, looking around. Keep an eye out for deformous spiders. We'll need to tame a few within half a day. Till then, I'll be training. Yes, Captain. Nodding, Shakti then moved to one of the routes where she told Ilta, I'll handle this hallway. Got it, sis. I'll make sure to reinforce anyone that needs it, her vice-captain said with a grin and wink. Shakti merely nodded. She then looked at the monsters slowly approaching. Ilta's group had done a good job of clearing the closer ones already, and they were hesitating to move forward. It allowed Shakti to start whispering, chanting her single spell under her breath. The mirror turns. Reflections abound. I look upon myself, what do I? Shakti continued speaking, even as the words became garbled and her mind refused to turn to them. The latter helped by the monsters reacting to the chant, as soft as it was. Several black rhinos moved forward. Shakti merely watched as she murmured, eyes sharp. It could have been problematic, but they were slow enough. The chant continued till blue light gathered around Shakti's hand. A point where she was able to shoot forward with the chant paused, Ignis Fatuus staved off. The sudden move allowed her to land a palm strike on the center black rhino, and the light shot into the monster. It remained standing though, confused itself at the lack of result. Shakti was still calm, merely jumping back to make distance as she resumed chanting. My curse. My blessing. My weakness. My talon. The words came automatically even as her eyes sharpened more and more as she eyed the monsters as they charged again. The spell fully activated just as the monsters reached her again and all swung in unison to crush and smash her totally. The monsters fell in pieces, limbs flying through the air and blood splattering. 3 black rhinos fell in an instant, with 3 more snake monsters joining them. All that remained was the black rhino she'd marked, which instead found itself knocked down. It cried out in anger, and got back to its feet. It froze, however, as it met Shakti's eyes. That was all that was needed. It was almost as if it could sense her aura, and her bad mood. I have little reason to tame you, but you can't die yet, she stated as she pointed her spear at it. Not after I've used this. She felt empowered. A surge in strength that overwhelmed even the consumption of mind. All her abilities pushed to the next limit. Less an addition as a restraints being released. Shakti hated it. Hated this spell. It was an overly long chant that made it oft unwieldy, and the heavy mind demand was already weighing down on her. It never made her feel good either. Breaking her chains felt cheap. Made her feel like she was trying to shed what formed those chains, which she couldn't allow. No matter how painful or heavy, they were the chains she had chosen. Yet the lost weight was disgustingly liberating, and it was impossible to deny the utility. More monsters rounded the corner. It was enough for the black rhino to regain its ingrained hatred and lunged at her again. Shakti's fist met its head. Her fist won, and the monster once again stumbled back. The others that had joined in got off far worse. Shakti's speed was as enhanced as her strength. Her spear was a flash as they were cut down. The monsters were overwhelmed and helpless against her current prowess, which was hard to believe came from a level 5. In but an instant, the black rhino once again found itself alone as it faced Shakti. The Ganesha Familia members chose to look away as Shakti held that route by herself for hours with the spell she couldn't use on the surface. They also chose to ignore the shivering black rhino that eventually led their next advance as if running from their captain. It took several days as they continued their steady progress down the labyrinth territory. Their speed forced to increase as they got closer and closer to the 58th floor as it became clear the cooldown of the Valgang dragons was decreasing as they had to blow through less floors. It ensured their time on each floor decreased. The day they had on the 54th floor dropped to 18 hours on the 55th, then 14 on the 56th, and a May 9 on the 57th. Thankfully, the shorter intervals didn't prove enough to get them properly caught up in one of their attacks. After all, they ensured they had deformous spiders. Besides their silk, which were used as ropes for each dive, the monsters had one great use. Considering their usual modus operandi of pulling adventurers into the blast holes of Valgang dragons, the monsters had extremely high ability to sense when said strikes were coming. Even a partly trained one served ably as a warning sign. The half-second hesitation as it fought its taming from the instinctual urge to act was enough. Shakti's spear cleaved it in half, making it irrelevant which side won the struggle, before they made distance enough that the white blast that lit up their eyes nonetheless didn't touch them. There were certainly advantages to the sort of monster knowledge that came with taming. Casting a stoic gaze at the hole now opened up with only the 58th floor below them, Shakti asked, "Status report." "For stamina, we're steady," someone responded, although they cast a look to the side as they added, "although not sure how much it has taken from Krem." "I am fine," the ashen-brown-haired elf tried to claim, the wobble in her stance betraying her even more than her pale pallor or weak voice. "And it is Kremer Estra. Take a mind potion. We need you ready," Shakti ordered. While Krem was the weaker of their two mags, a new level 4 to level 5 Anais, Krem had the more destructive spells. Not to mention, she had the healing spell they'd been relying on so far this time. Anais was more specialized for non-lethal delay and defense. The lack of firepower in the Ganesha familiar had led Shakti to start working with the young elf, and it had led to her rising from level 2 to 4 in but 2 years. She was still woefully unexperienced for Shakti's taste, and her status was one of the 2 lowest of all the level 4s present. Shakti preferred to keep her with the level 2s and 3s of her previous party, but she would be necessary regardless for the Valgang dragons. Once the elf reluctantly nodded and swallowed one of their mind potions, Shakti turned to Ilter and asked, "How many Valgang dragons down there?" "Sevno. 8. The answer made Shakti frown. It was an unfortunate number, but also expected. Valgang dragons were slow, even awkward, once you got close, but also bulky and tough. That defense was not easy for even strong level 5s to overcome. 8 was a worrying number. A number that Shakti would usually use as reason to turn back and start climbing again. This time she just hummed, continuing her questioning. "Potions. We're good on health and stamina, due to Krem, but we're running low on mind." Knowing she was partially responsible for that, Shakti's spell was very demanding and she'd been using it every stop to train. Shakti nodded and said, "Prioritize Krem over Anais or myself. I'll handle the strain. Anais, switch to staff wielding if you need to. Equipment. Our current shields have been bent and hammered back into shape, but we'll keep with them to spare the replacements," Graint claimed gruffly. "Our spears are doing well enough," Veta said. The spearmanship DA was common in their familiar, which always helped. The D effectively increased damage dealt by spears with each rank. It made cutting through even tough enemies less damaging. Shakti's efforts to make it common were for such reasons. Although the real boon on their weapons was likely more due to having skipped so much of the usual grind the floors before the 50th typically demanded. Not having reinforcements or resupply on the 50th floor was worrying, but in many ways it was paying off in how quickly they got here and avoiding the combat that came with wagons and weaker members. That all but Ilter and her were carrying extra gear also helped. She would have to consider this arrangement for the future in deep dives. Naturally, the good news was soon broken, however, by Zen speaking up, the youngest level 4 alongside Krem of their group speaking up as he held up his long sword. "My sword is in pretty bad condition. So chipped it doesn't have much cut anymore." Shakti eyed him for a moment, eventually making a call and declaring, "Keep using it for now. Switch to relying on your spell and avoiding combat. Better to have you use your replacement on the 59th floor than have 2 chipped ones from trying to fight any Valgang dragons yourself." "Sis is right, farm boy," Ilta said, laughing boredly and slapping his shoulder teasingly. "You should be focused on surviving here. Don't make sis or I save you, although that's probably a fantasy for you, ha." That made Zen's glower, although he took the chuckles that came from Ilter in good stride. Not that he could avoid it. Like Krem, he was a new level 4. He was brought into this group since he was one of the more talented Ganesha members despite his age and inexperience. 2 useful skills and a short chance spell that allowed him to cover his body in an armor of any nearby material, usually used to form a buckler or punching gauntlet in his offhand, really did place him above what the Ganesha familiar usually worked with. They had gotten down here by knowing their routines, their tactics, and sticking to them, not from any overwhelming strength by the standards of the Loki or Freya familiars. The Ganesha familiar only had a handful of people with top-quality skills or spells by the standards of those groups, but Shakti had made sure to know how to use every single one as best as possible. That in mind, Shakti contemplated the situation before announcing carefully, "Okay, here is the plan. Our chance of clearing 8 Valgang dragons is small. Doing so without destroying basically all our weapons and armor and before more spawn, even less so. Thus, we won't aim for complete annihilation. Just like before the 50th floor, we'll push our way through. Accounts I checked of the glacier territory said it was less densely populated. If we move quick, we can leave multiple Valgang dragons behind." Was it wise to not completely wipe out enemies on their route of retreat when they were about to take their first steps into an even more dangerous floor? Probably not. If they intended to reach the 59th floor, though, and Shakti had long since recognized her sullen thoughts on that goal as pointless and thus discarded them, it was still their best option. Even if they could wipe out entirely all the monsters on the 58th floor, the Loki familiar on their last expedition had been forced to turn back from the toll it took on their weapons. From experience and by nature, Shakti preferred not to overestimate her own. "We'll split into 2 groups," Shakti continued again, meeting everyone's eyes. "An assault team on the Valgang dragons, and a scouting group to check the 59th Ilta. You'll lead the latter. You check if the 59th floor allows us the space and room to recover and operate. Should the area be too filled with monsters, we must retreat. If it is open, return and we descend as quickly as possible." "I won't let you down, sis," Ilta promised, patting her chest confidently. Shakti merely nodded, continuing, "I'll take Ligand, Veta, Ryana, Anais, Tamana, Uda, and Krem. You'll have Graint, Ladako, Dissol, Reshid, Disk, Dench, Zens. You all move quick, while we'll set up for heavy combat. Krem, you'll have a role in our opening moves." The elf sighed and asked plaintively, "You can't even use my full name when you're putting so much on me." Shakti was kneeling at the edge of the great hole in the dungeon to the 58th floor, overlooking the roughly 300-meter drop and the distant forms of the Valgang dragons. The buzzing in her head stopped as her chant finished. Darpana Avamutta. Disk had the injured silverworm monster laid out next to her, his whip and sword out to keep it cowed as she laid a hand on it and completed her spell. She stood as her power surged. She took a breath, and then jumped. The wyverns filling the air noticed her near immediately, as did the Valgang dragons. The wyverns started flying towards her, and the nearest Valgang dragon opened its maw. There were plenty enough wyverns for some to breath fire at her even as others closed in to bite at her, and a bright light started to gather in the mouth of the larger dragon. Arrows started to pepper the incoming wyverns, failing to slay them yet making them recoil and look at their attacker, Ryana, who had jumped down with the second group. This one consisting of several others, Grant and his 2 supporters, and Tamana, who had just finished chanting. As the protective lights of duality shield settled over Shakti, she ignored the fireballs that washed over her. She instead looked at the far stronger blast of the dragon coming up at her. Twirling her spear, readied it for a great blow. Fire split as magic protected her, allowing her to come down and connect with the dragon's thick neck with a yell, "Higher!" The spear pierced through, the force of her fall combined with her current power severing entirety of the dragon's neck. She landed hard on the floor, but her prowess made the fall inconsequential. Before the decapitated head hit the ground beside her, she was moving and attacking, intent on using the boost from her spell as much as possible before dropping it. Darting at the closest dragon, she didn't wait till she reached it. Instead, she drew her arm back and tossed her spear. Her spear went through the bone of its wing, blowing a hole in a way closer to a cannon or spell than a simple thrown spear. Her kick then caught the roaring dragon right under the jaw, knocking it off its feet before darting to regain her spear. The second group landed, and then the third. "Orario!" Ilta yelled as she landed on another dragon, striking with all her force like Shakti had done. Unfortunately, the Valgang dragons were more durable than the wyverns had been. Its legs collapsed and it roared in pain, but its scales held. Nor did the follow-up punches of Ilta as she continued. "Just die. Die. Die." The Amazon was forced off when the dragon recovered enough to stand and heave. Ligand's own falling strike was just as successful in only wounding the Valgang dragon he struck at, even his massive axe and heavily armored form only wounding it. The wyverns up above had detected where they were jumping from, and were closing, trying to hit them mid-air as they dropped. Expected. Krem, with the final group that had yet to jump, had a magic circle forming behind her with multiple white-grey orbs of light pulsing within as her chant finished. Nature's burn. The orbs started to unleash beams at the approaching wyverns. The wyverns dipped and dived to try and avoid the narrow beams of magic, but the beams moved to shift with their targets. Not all hit, but those that did burned right through the monsters, leaving holes of only ash within them as they fell. Those beams that missed continued on, bombarding the ground uselessly. Yet, the orbs continued to spawn beams of destruction. This time, they moved to the larger targets on the ground. 2 Valgang dragons fell under assault of this magic artillery, and bellowed in pain even as many of the beams missed. The low accuracy ended up being the monster's salvation, the spell ending with the 2 monsters only wounded and harmed by the barrage. Form up, Shakti ordered as the final group moved to drop, everyone gathering as the final members of the expedition landed. Ilta, go. Moving, Ilta said, moving away with her group. The rest of you, Shakti said, looking at the monsters which were gathering themselves. They had certainly dealt great harm against the monster horde in that opening strike. 1 of the Valgang dragons was dead, and 4 more wounded to varying degrees. Nearing 24 of the wyverns had also been killed. Yet the sight was not reassuring. 3 unharmed Valgang dragons, 4 more wounded, and more wyverns coming by the minute. An intimidating array even if everyone was available, much less the 4 level 5s and 3 level 4s with her. Shakti had planned on dropping her spell due to the mind drain, but she silently kept it up. Target the wounded ones first, and leave the others to me, Shakti said as she took a stance facing the approaching monsters. Do not be too aggressive. Stay together, and cover each other, don't fall. Any experienced adventurer could tell you how even minutes could quickly become as exhausting and straining as hours. Higher. Shakti let out as she made 5 thrusts deep into one of the dragon's flanks in an instant, before ducking to dodge as it spun to try and use its wing as a weapon on her. She felt the heavy blow pass just above her head, blowing her hair, and then succumbed as its actual wing membrane unleashed a local hurricane. She lashed out with her spear even as she was blown away, cutting a rent in its wing membrane before propelled out of range. A swooping wyvern tried to snatch her in midair, but her armored fist met its head. She also latched on, swinging herself onto its back. Even as it flapped and tried to buck her off, her spear pierced it and she jumped off as it fell. As she rolled with the landing, she called out, "Regroup 100 meters north of the stairs." "Why yes. On it. Moving." The responses she received showed that the exhaustion was eating at everyone. They had done good work. Shakti had managed to finish off 2 of the injured dragons relatively quick with the boost from Darpana Avamata, and a team effort had managed to bring down another after some work. Another use of nature's burn had brought down the last. 2 of the Valgang dragons had also been rendered insensate by Anai's curse. That still left them in a conundrum, and the successes had come at a cost. Armor had been dented, and no small amount of burns too. Tamana was using her spell as quickly as possible, but she couldn't cover everyone. The monsters were also smart enough to eventually connect that those encased in light were immune to their flames, and targeted those unprotected. Shakti had already ordered everyone else be protected, but there were other dangers. Udar had taken a blow, and Tamana was giving him a potion. Rihanna had run out of arrows, and was using her whip while her and Veta tried to collect them. Ligand was forced to carry Anais around, the curse she'd used on the dragons rendering her just as befuddled as her target. Krem was the worst, blood running down her nose and body wobbling as she tried to keep moving. Needing to use her healing spell on Veta at one point had only added onto the necessary offensive spells she'd used on the numerous enemies. The state of those around her made Shakti refuse to slow as she darted at any enemy approaching the more vulnerable members. She ignored the throbbing of her own head that was a sign of impending mind down, refusing to drop her own buff spell due to its necessity in their current state. She also bore the results of prioritizing others for Tamana's protection. Her orange battle dress was burned and blackened, and no small bit of her skin was the same. Her hands throbbed, her protective gauntlets bent and broken along with at least 1 bone in each hand from when she needed to resort to unarmed strikes. She didn't even have the space to wonder how long Ilta's group had been gone. She just continued to fight, refusing to slow. More enemies yet remained. Multiple wounded dragons dispatched, but more remained and so far she was the only one able to meet them. Spotting the remaining attacking dragon open its maw again, she reacted instinctively and launched her spear again. It hit right in its eye, and it recoiled. She tried to run forward to jump at it, but she sensed incoming from the side. Her whip came out and smacked one wyvern off course, but another followed. She had just enough time to use her hands to grab the snapping jaws of the wyvern as it dived on her. It didn't even try to pull up, just slamming into the ground for the slightest chance of harming her. Partially succeeding in crushing her, Shakti found herself fighting off the wyvern as it all but lay on top of her. Hands grasped at its jaws to keep it away from biting off her face, and her body moved from side to side to avoid claws. She forced herself to calm, however, and merely slowly worked at gaining control of its head. "You are far too late to be able to kill me," she said simply once she managed to force its head still. Her leg rose, connecting with its lower jaw. This allowed her to force its head up, and finally slip out beneath it. The instant she was on her feet, she lashed out with a palm strike right at its throat, higher. The flesh crumbled inwards under the strike, but Shakti wasn't able to enjoy it. Instead, she had to jump away to avoid the blast of fire that hit right where she had been. The Valgang dragon had attacked again, uncaring of its fellow monster. Shakti breathed as the heat washed over her, meeting the lone remaining eye of the enemy. "Sis!" That made her start, though, and she turned her head. She had to dive as the dragon lunged, but that was worth it. After all, she saw the sight they desperately needed. Ilta's group returning. This situation was about to end. Regardless of the news Ilta brought, that was the case. Either they would be able to descend, or they couldn't, and Shakti wouldn't hesitate ordering them to start retreating back to the surface. "Get away from her!" Ilta cried as she charged the dragon itself, landed a kick to its head. The blow largely proved ineffective, though, and Ilta was forced to retreat as it tried to snap at her. "Tough bastards." "Not the time," Shakti said, despite using the opportunity to jump at the dragon herself. Landing on its head, she held on even as it tried to throw her off. She remained just long enough to grab her spear still buried in its eye. Pushing it deeper briefly, she then jumped off with it when it let out a roar of agony. "What did you find on the 59th floor?" "It's freezing," Ilta immediately complained, as if indignant at the very thought. "But no monsters." Shakti only cared about the latter, immediately crying out loud, "Head for the stairs. Descend immediately to the 59th floor." "Shouldn't we finish these things?" Ilta asked, though, kicking again at the Valgang dragon. "No, they are unimportant," Shakti replied, turning away even as she made sure Ilta did the same. "We'll need your group to defend us for a time on the 59th floor anyways. We can't have you tire yourself out." Not to mention, Shakti saw two large figures approaching from the distance. The dungeon had spawned more Valgang dragons. With their current condition, Shakti didn't believe they could clear this floor even if they were willing afterwards to head straight to the surface. Better to reach the 59th floor, rest, do what they can, and then start ascending while trying to ignore every monster they could. Retreat to the 59th floor. Everyone started to move, Ilta's group providing cover from the wyverns that were trying to descend on them. Shakti was right with them. If nothing else, their efforts had thinned the horde currently around them. Not that the enemy wasn't persistent itself, the Valgang dragon charging after them and the wyverns all swapping to harass them. It was only natural that a stumble would occur. It also wasn't expected that it was Krem who did so. Bordering mind down, a barrage of fireballs from the wyverns hitting before her sent her stumbling back with a cry. "Ilta, Graint, Ladako," Shakti called even as she turned so fast her innards felt like they were wrenched out of place. That hardly mattered though as she accelerated again. She jumped at the diving wyverns, twisting body through the air as she swung her spear. Two were downed even as she narrowly slipped between two more that tried to block her, landing before Krem. Fireballs from others were already closing in, and she had to immediately start spinning her spear to break apart and sweep the attacks away. Manageable, but the wyverns shifting signaled something far worse. Grabbing her spear firmly, Shakti spun to face the beam of one of the Valgang dragons and swung down with all her strength. Heat and force washed over her, seeking to consume her. The fire scorched both cloth and skin, and the attack actually carried force enough to leave one's arms trembling and rocked back on one's heels. Shakti was no different. Yet it cleared, and she remained. Body scorched and arms trembling, but only just that. While on a different level to the rapid fireballs of the wyvern, these attacks were also a level below their great strikes that tore through floors. She could handle them. Unfortunately, the move to the 59th floor had finally seemingly released the other two Valgang dragons from Anai's curse. More such beams followed the first. She swung her spear to meet, endure, and disperse each one. The sleeves of her battle dress were burned off, and the armored gauntlets on her forearms burned hot and turned black. Skin blistered and peeled, smoke coming from her body to fill her nose and leave her eyes watering. Yet she handled it, and the barrage seemed set to end with one final one. Only for her spell to cut out in the middle, the silver worm likely dying. The relapsing of her chains in the middle of blocking the attack tipped her backwards. The attack exploded. Shakti's eyes and ears betrayed her for a moment, overwhelmed by being in the epicenter of it. She lost the feeling of ground beneath her feet, and instead floated. Sensations was lost for an instant. Then she hit the ground, and it all came back. Even as she scrabbled to her feet, she felt hands grasp at her and words that sounded distorted. Then a wave of warmth came over her. Not the burning heat of the attack, but a gentle warmth. One that sank into her skin and seemed to sweep away the burning itching pain covering her. "See Captain Shakti." Krem's voice came out again. "Get back," Shakti said as she regained her feet, Krem's sustained healing spell speeding up her recovery from seconds to even less. "And good job. Now, dash, sis," Ilta called in, flying through the air to punch a diving wyvern out of the air. "We've got you." "Guard the captain." Graint yelled too as he came into block with his shield, more fireballs trying to come down. His two subordinated with him. By time. Lediko didn't even need to say anything. She was merely with Ilta, killing any wyverns. Her own spear reaching out to cleave any that came close. Her speed picked up enough that it was clear she was using her own buff spell. "Just get Krem out of here," Shakti ordered, eyes going to the real threats and darting forward at what she saw. The injured Valgang dragon once again opening its mouth, its remaining eye locked on Shakti with hatred. It was pure instinct from Shakti. The sight of gathering light in its maw igniting the most pure of fight-or-flight instinct, and drawing a response only an adventurer would have. Diving right into it. Her legs pumping so fast she felt like her muscles might tear, her arm rearing back with spear in preparation for the thrust. The distance closed in an instant, but feeling like longer. A moment of extended time as the attack gathered and her spear shot forward in a picture-perfect thrust. The contest to strike first so close that it was impossible to tell, but each committing entirely. Her spear pierced. Fire exploded again. Shakti didn't even breath as the smoke cleared, in the mouth of the Valgang dragon. Her spear going through the back of its mouth to connect with its spinal cord. Teeth ready to tear her to shreds all around, but the monster frozen in its moment of death. She finally let out a breath again. "I got you, sis," Ilta cried as she darted in, grabbing Shakti by the waist and pulling her out before gravity reasserted itself on the head of the dead monster and its mouth closed. "You got it, and now we'll get you to the stairs. Just watch over Krem." Shakti was actually fine with that. She specifically called for this group as they had been the ones who scouted the 59th floor, and thus were fresher. They had clearly picked up on that too, those who had been fighting out of sight, down the stairs, while the remaining scouting group guarded the stairs entrance. As they did proceed to remove every attacking wyvern they could, Shakti found herself running next to Krem. The remaining utter exhaustion of the latter soon meant Shakti soon moved and half supported the elf as they ran, drawing a mumbled, "I am sorry, Captain. I can keep dash, don't worry about it," Shakti said, fighting off her own exhausting and impending mind down. "I'm only like this because of your spell." It was true too. Not only had some of her burns been recovered, but she had also avoided more. Even infinitesimally faster in her strike, she had been caught in the explosion of the dragon's strike. She would have survived, but with more burns. She hadn't been as Krem's spell had been active. While not suited for widespread healing of many people at once, it was a healing spell with a great deal of utility. Embedding a certain amount of mind in a spell mark on the person, it then used that mind to provide physical and magical attacks while also siphoning some off for modest healing and stamina recovery. To have used the time Shakti was defending her to chant the spell and apply it despite her condition. Shakti looked at Krem and ensured she could see her smile as she said, "Good job, Kremarestra." Krem all but going limp from happiness and relief was not exactly ideal, but still sweet. Until Ilta cursed, "Damn it, those ones." They had managed to leave the two Valgang dragons behind, but the two that had spawned had gotten close enough to cut them off from the stairs. Well, one of them. They could hopefully avoid the gathering attack of the other, but those guarding the stairs weren't going to be able to hold it against the first. "See, Captain," Krem whispered, voice fading. "I am useless like this. You can do it to me." Shakti hesitated as Ilta sped up to try and help push the monster back from blocking them. She hesitated as both Graint and Ladako joined her. She finally forced herself to stop hesitating as she saw clearly they would fail. She instead forced herself to chant through a stony face and raging feeling in her heart. The mirror turns. Reflections abound. I look upon myself, what do I see? I look upon you, what do you hold? I cannot see myself, let my essence flow W. She couldn't look at Krem as she chanted, and her words stopped mattering. The fog only faded when she heard Krem gasp even as Shakti's only power surged again. I am sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you all I just see couldn't I can't dash Krem started mumbling, growing increasingly insensate with every word yet her pain and sadness clear. Biting her own lip, Shakti handed her off to another. Her eyes then turned with a glare at the monster blocking her way. The one that made her do that. She moved forward without restraint, intent merely on making it pay. Captain, a call went out, as Graint caught sight of her and threw his worn and beaten axe in the air over the enemy. Shakti jumped, hand catching it from mid-air, and she came down with it in a furious swing. The axe shattered. The monster's neck was cleaved through. The way was cleared. Shakti immediately released her spell as she moved towards the stairs, but she saw that Krem had already fainted. Pushed fully into mind down. Shakti had to look away. Let's go down, she merely said as they quickly funneled into the stairs moments before the remaining Valgang dragons arrived. At least they had made it to the 59th floor, whatever comfort that was. Well, this is a beefy one. 20k. It's also the climax of Shakti's arc here though, and one of the more in-depth looks we get at the 59th floor. Had a lot to touch on with Shakti, even if I have been trying to drop is one more part of Shakti's arc. But at least next 2 chapters aren't Shakti. Actually 3. Think it is a Loki familiar, Otter, and Tsubaki updates before we finish up Shakti's. Hope this is enjoyable though. Also, almost forgot replies. Torres Juan 010, him, floor bosses. Generally speaking, the real threat is that in comparison to most other monsters, they have much more HP. Goliath isn't too much stronger than another large, high-level 4 monster. But it at 100 HP where most monsters have 5 to 25. This means that any battle without a large power gap is a slog where a single hit can really hurt you. So unless you have the maneuverability of AIS to dodge and great offensive ability relative to level, and I like to remind people that AIS had to be bailed out once due to a glancing blow from Udius, or Otter's endurance and recovery capability, you just have so little leeway while it has a lot. Generally, 3 to 5 adventurers a level lower is possible so long as someone doesn't goof. When you go lower, you're probably wanting a dozen just to really keep that chip damage in effect and allow a few to withdraw if necessary. Okay, Valgang dragons were not enough. I'm rather a believer in leveling up being hard, especially once you reach higher levels. You'll also receive info on Shakti's spell this chapter. OBE run, unfortunately, Astrea Familia died years before this story started. It pains me too, because I genuinely love that Familia. One of main temptations for pre-Great Feud story ideas. As for SV or Airmid, latter is a bit more likely. Who knows though? Hopefully I have enough world building done to occasionally just throw an interesting POV in once in a while. Insane Mikayashin, PMs you since you had several questions that were easy to answer. Everything looks to be in order, Shakti said as she looked over the requisition form for the familiar supplies. She nodded at the person beyond the counter. I shall fetch it all immediately. Of course, little Shaw. Shakti stared at the use of that old nickname. It eventually made Kane squirm, eventually bursting out with a self-depreciating chuckle. Okay. Shakti, no need to get mad at me. You're a big girl. Yet the way you are saying big girl, Shakti countered, eyebrows furrowing at the teasing tone that had been used. Okay, enough with the look, Kane finally exclaimed, holding his hands up in surrender. You'll be a terror when you grow up, Lady Shakti. Shakti nodded in satisfaction at that. Just need a few more years. And her frown returned. Oh, don't listen to this lug, Shakti, the one next to him said, slapping Kane on the shoulder. Jaff then sent her a grin as he added, he'll distract you from your work for an hour, if you let him. Starting at that reminder, she nodded and moved into the back. Inside several minutes she was back, holding a tray of items that she slid to them while saying, here is everything you requested. That was quick. Jaff quickly agreed, taking them even as he sent her a look and commented, it was. Usually, it takes a bit longer. Shakti nodded and, trying not to puff up, explained simply, the storehouse is well organized, but still big. I simply started putting together a selection early in the morning that is ready to go. I have to put away anything unused at the end of the day, but I think it more convenient for rapid turnover items. Clever girl, Kane remarked. It is, Jaff said, although he quickly put it away. We got to get running though, so not the time to say more. Have a good one, little Shakti. Shakti allowed the little to go since he didn't say it in the teasing way of Kane. Instead, she just waved goodbye to the two that she'd known for all her life leaving. She then got back to her job at the Ganesha Familiar Supply Depot. It was several hours that a voice she instantly recognized called out, "Enjoying yourself, Shakti?" "Yes, father," she said as she looked at him approaching. "Mother-in-law's too. Good afternoon. Do you need anything?" "Nah, just checking in," her mother said, smiling down happily at her. "Just a few questions about what you wanted tonight." "Got to appreciate our fine daughter at her job," her father added too, laughing boldly before leaning in to whisper. "If you want to leave to have some fun though, I think I can look the other way today." "Father are Puranas," Shakti and her mother let out simultaneously in chiding tones. Sorry. What can I say? It's my daughter's 12th birthday. She should have a day," he protested. Just shaking her head, Shakti watched as her mother took her father to task. It was a rarer sight, since her father was usually actually quite serious. Puranas Vamal was the current captain of the Ganesha Familiar, at level 6. Even he knew that came with responsibilities. It wasn't hard either to look the part. While tanner than Shakti, he was otherwise her written large with dark blue hair, serious set to the mouth, and firm gaze. He was the indulgent parent though. Turning away from her father, Shakti looked at her slate-grey-haired mother and informed her calmly, "I do not mind how we celebrate, although it's best to ensure Jain and the others are entertained." Having 5 younger siblings meant any family gatherings had to go a certain way if one didn't want tantrums. "We'll handle your siblings, Shakti. This is your day," her mother reminded her gently. "Your mother is right. Think of what you want," her father said, only to get more serious as he glanced at the supply depot. Sighing, he then continued, "And, just to tell Lord Ganesha before the party, are you sure you wish to stay working here? We wanted to wait till you were 10 years, and are honestly glad to have extended it to 12, but you can receive a Falna now if you wish. It's your choice, but the expectation won't fade." Shakti just looked at him though, eventually smiling and saying, "I'm quite satisfied merely working to support the familiar in the logistics, father." "Well, if that is your choice," he merely said with a chuckle, putting his hand on her head and ruffling her hair. Shakti came to with the grimy slowness that spoke of shaking off mind down. "Captain," a voice spoke as she stirred, making her open her eyes to make out an eyes through blurry vision. "Don't take it too fast. You are still recovering. Ilta." While it did take several seconds, Shakti was able to sit up with vision clearing. It allowed her to see that they were in a cave, small crystal magic items emitting light. At least half the team was inside, most wrapped up warmly. "Finally awake, sis?" Ilta asked as she jumped in from the entrance. "Appears you are actually dressed," Shakti started, only to immediately cut to that statement. "Hey, I am always dressed," Ilta immediately protested, although she then picked at the far more covering and thick clothing with a pout. "It's just cold out, so I had to get dressed a bit more." Deciding to shrug off the unusual sight of an Amazon with a thick coat and pants, Shakti looked down to see the bedroll she had been put in and asked unnecessarily, "I passed out." "You kept moving for quite a bit, but walking down, you know," Ilta said with hands raised with a shrug. Shakti did. While mind down tended to result in straight fainting as level 1 or 2, higher levels allowed a wider range to start appearing. Depending on one's own characteristics, a number of factors like willpower, mind reserves, mind recovery, and more started to have an effect. Sometimes you found people that collapsed in a straight faint at the hint of mind down, but recovered in half a day. Others could push through, keep fighting in a battle and even be aware for a short time afterwards, only to then collapse and not be able to speak or think clearly for 3 days. Walking down was an unofficial term for those all but unconscious even if they can keep moving and doing simple tasks. Shakti started to remember it too. The blur of memories and the landscape passing. The exhaustion you push through till you are moving through a haze inside your mind. All details scrubbed. Nodding, Shakti asked quickly, "Situation?" While Shakti was the captain and preferred keeping on top of things, everyone in this was a veteran who could handle themselves in the dungeon, which the following explanation proved. The Valgang dragons descended. "Yep," Ilta confirmed with a little pop of her lips. "They blasted through the stairs bottleneck with their fires. Aeneas elaborated, checking Shakti's pulse and eye movement. Not too surprising since we left them behind, but we had already made some distance and only made more when they came through, not that it proved needed. We were too far to see properly and I couldn't go scout as I needed to watch everyone, but some things you don't need to see personally, Ilter added. 2 Valgang dragons descended to the 59th floor. Ilter saw the forms of monsters, land and flying, drawn from miles by their entrance descend on them. The Valgang dragons did not leave the island. That was enough. We can't draw such attention ourselves, Shakti immediately stated. We don't intend to, Ilta said, as she then continued to explain. After making a distance from all that were drawn in by the blaring signal of the Valgang's dragons blast through the floor, it hadn't taken the fresher members long to see they needed to rest. Shakti couldn't even remember any conversations. A cave had proven a lucky finding. Well, it had seemingly been more a crevice that they'd had to widen themselves, but that wasn't an issue for level 4 and 5 so long as it was just regular rock. Even found some adamantite, Ilta remarked cheerily, pointing to a little pile of ore. Alongside some coal of all things, but the adamantite is nice and pure. Lucky perk. We hunkered down to allow recovery, with those fresher guarding outside. Anais quickly took over, nodding at her check of Shakti. Catching Shakti looking at Krem in a similar bedroll to herself, she added, Krem's fine. It's been a day, but she'll likely need 2 more. A day, Shakti repeated herself, finally nodding with newly resolved look. She forced herself back up, stretching carefully to remove, at least alleviate, the lingering aches and weakness of her body. We'll keep resting for now, but I need to get a feel for this all myself. Well, we have this ready for you, Ilta said as she brought out a coat, making Shakti rather aware of how much the battle on the 58th floor had ruined her battle dress, repair enchantments or not. She was experienced enough to know this happened in the dungeon, not overreacting, but she was quick to grab the coat regardless. She then went out to look over the guards, which only made her ask, what attacked? These ice raptor monsters. Like from the dense forest ravine. Graint answered her quick, before raising a hand to several teeth marks in his armor. Much stronger though. I wouldn't want to be alone against a pack, but we were able to avoid that. Main issue is they have this spit attack. My armor blocked it well and Ladaka was only stalled for a time, but Disc took some skin with it, the slightly pot-bellied tamer of the group said, gesturing to where his right shoulder was wrapped up while trying not to grimace. Sorry, it was because I dash, and I've already said to not worry about it. Disc cut off Zen's apologetic words, ruffling his hair before shoving it playfully. We all get caught out, and better me than you. It's not even bad enough for a potion. Shakti took in the wound even as the camaraderie between the 2 level 4s showed, reluctantly admitting. With Krem down, we do need to be careful with minor injuries. First whiff of any infection dash, and I'll tell you right away, Captain, Disc answered easily, chuckling. I have no intent on dying to a bloody infection. Not responding to that, Shakti merely continued her survey of the situation. Everyone awake and moving was heavily clothed, even inside the cave. If the cave had been drafty though, the outside was bitterly cold. Even Shakti had to pull her coat tighter. Not even a level 6 would be spared needing more protection, and the level 4s were requiring frequent times inside to warm up. She also got her first look at the glacier territory. Numerous islands of frozen ice or black rock within view, connected or not so connected by bridges of ice. All surrounded by black seas and an evening sky. Was light earlier, but been like this for a while. Merely nodding at that, Shakti went inside. She called those resting inside to help as they laid out and took an accounting of all their supplies. With everyone but Shakti and Ilta having carried some sort of bags, they were surprisingly well off. Naturally, it wasn't as much as if they had brought wagons. However, they had reached here in the same week time frame that it usually took wagons to reach the 50th floor, and their supplies were merely being split between 16 people as opposed to the half 100 any expedition usually was composed of. She made sure to go over all the armor and weapons, then the potions, the current state of everyone, and finally the food. She soon found herself at the center of everyone still up and explained while meeting all their eyes. We're doing a classic 3-group, 2-part rotation for this. The injured and finished stay here till recovered. The rotation is between home group guarding the shelter and recovering while the venturing group scouts and hunts. I shall always lead the latter. Home group shall defend, but no one is to go out seeking combat without my presence. Understood? Yes, Captain Shakti. Good. Now our priorities and concerns to keep track of, Shakti continued. Proceed carefully, and I expect all of you to listen if I call for a retreat. We do not know the monsters here, and surprises will happen. You do more by going back with information for next time than standing and potentially dying. That also applies to our drops. Take full liberty with collecting anything of value we can find. Treat this as an information-gathering mission. Monsters, drops, the environment. These are the lifeblood of any plans to advance further. We don't know what the Freya or Loki familiars might reveal, so we must secure ourselves in this. No matter how harrowing it was in this moment, should everything go right, they would be returning here. If Shakti leveled up, if some of the senior level 4s leveled up, a year or two wasn't impossible. To fail in that would be an ill sign of the near future. That isn't all we need to do though. Ilta quickly burst out, clearly thinking the same. The Amazon was exciting, grinning and looking at Shakti eagerly. We're here for you, sis. That's our first priority. Her words only drew similar looks from the others. And sometimes it isn't so simple, but thank you all, Shakti said, trying to take this as it's meant over the more pessimistic thoughts. That is why I shall focus with the venturing team. You all shall support me in fights that hopefully shall serve to provide high-class Excelia. That is my concern, however. You focus on watching yourselves, the monsters, and potential resources and drops. We'll do everything necessary so you can focus on taking the next step, Captain, Ligand assured her. Shakti merely hummed in quiet acknowledgement before diving back into other information. We'll act as a group, sticking to scouting and smaller battles till Krem is up. We can't expect her to heal everything from now on though, as I'd prefer her to provide magical attacks. Anything serious, we use a potion. With our supplies, we're likely to be forced to return due to equipment and potions shortages than food. So be aware, but we're not here to avoid combat. I'd rather have a productive week than 2 of hiding and sneaking. We challenge these floors to assess their danger for the future. Am I understood? Yes, Captain. Then, adventurers of Ganesha, ready yourselves to move. Exploring a new territory in the dungeon was always harrowing. It was arguably the time when most adventurers died. The new environment, new monsters, new strength of the enemies you are facing. It all has a way of overwhelming someone. More new environmental information than ever barraging you. Agree to need to focus solely on remaining alert to unknown monster threats. The lack of ingrained habits and experience on what to expect or where to do. The crossroads of these facts had a way of affecting a person. Not always purely for good or ill either. Some found themselves far more hyper-aware of the new environment than they usually were, but made amateur mistakes in combat. Others had their focus refined into a sharp blade, but would come out with little memory besides of combat. Some panicked and lost hope in the face of new opponents that were stronger than they were used to, but subsequently could be inspired to force themselves to new heights. Shakti honestly had more important things to consider than which she was, but that didn't mean she didn't acknowledge that truth. There was a reason an old saying was that true adventurers were the ones constantly pushing the border of the unknown, and the 59th floor was no different in that regard. You could tell a lot about a floor's dangers based on its pests. If they were too much a challenge, it was as clear a sign as you would receive that you were not ready for that floor. Shakti's spear lashed out in a thrust to meet the ice raptor that lunged, but it reacted fast and pulled back. Her spear still cut into its face, but it survived and bounded back while spitting. She dodged the ice spit, and then had to spin her spear to warn away the one that tried to flank her. When this one tried to pull back, she jumped at it. "Don't let up," she called as she stabbed it, using that to vault herself to avoid the first that tried to get at her rear. As she landed, she tore the spear out its spine, and she then did a straight thrust at the other. Divide up between attacking and defending. "Got it," Graint said, currently blocking the largest one from pushing into the center of their formation. "Dissol. Reshid. We're here," one of the other shield bearers claimed as he moved with great speed to catch a spit attack before it could hit Tamana. The other moved too, catching a coordinated strike from the opposite direction the same. Uncaring of how his shield sprouted a flower of ice from it, he added, "We'll be Tamana's shields." Shakti nodded even as she twisted her spear into the ice raptor, finishing it off. Exactly as hoped. She'd only elected to take 3 level 4s for this first trip, and she'd chosen carefully. Tamana for duality shelter, which should work here as good as it did in the labyrinth territory, and Dissol and Reshid for their equipment. With the spit attack of these monsters taking no small bit of skin with it against level 4s, it was only natural to choose the ones with full armor and shields. The level 5s were in a much better place. Well, except Graint. which was why Shakti darted in to aid him first. The larger ice raptor detected her and managed to dodge enough that her spear merely scored its flank over, stabbing deep, and its retaliatory snap of its jaws snapped right by her ear as she dodged too. She had to use her spear to block as it spun to strike at her with its tail, but she flowed with it into a backflip. As soon as her feet landed, she jumped back with 3 thrusts at its face near. Instantaneous. It took the blows to its face, even as it then charged right back at her. She had to jump to the side. "Captain!" Rihanna's voice called from a rock she jumped onto to provide ranged support. Shakti immediately understood why. Her jump had put her moving towards one of the smaller raptors, an enemy that was already lunging with mouth wide open. How the larger one then spun to lunge if she dodged was far too cinched to ascribe to luck. Proper pack techniques and tactics. Too bad mankind wasn't lacking in such either. Rihanna's arrow caught the smaller raptor in the eye, making it recoil, and having trusted Rihanna would cover that, Shakti sent a thrust right into the larger one's opened mouth. The spear had burst from the back of its head. It trembled for several moments, as if fighting its fate, but finally moved to collapse. Shakti tore her spear out the side as soon as it did so, spinning 180 degrees to also cut the neck of the blinded smaller one. The raptors were not simple to handle. Their ice spit was a threat for those caught in it, with any level 4 at extra risk from the wounds incurred. Their pack tactics also had to be considered. Only the larger ones could genuinely threaten a level 5 alone, but they were still threats. Shakti would say any group of level 4s would need to know of the spit attack and be of equal number to decisively win against them. A numerical edge too if a leader was among the raptors. She also wouldn't place any newer level 5 against even a small pack alone. Yet, ultimately, manageable to proper squads acting with care. "I see some caribou-like monsters," Rihanna said from the highest point she found on this island. She hopped 30 meters without hesitation to land softly beside us. "Next island over. Thick horns that don't split but curve?" Shakti asked. "Yes. I read of these from the records of Zeus and Hera. Antica, they called them," Shakti explained. "They'll attack if provoked, but largely are migratory herbivores. Their horns are valuable though, and can be cut off if we subdue them." "Well, we are trying to get at least a few examples of everything we can while here," Ilta said, a bit disappointed that this wouldn't be a harsh battle. Although, said battle did not prove a cakewalk either. The monsters were willing to defend themselves, even if running was their preferred method. The number of non-lethal ways for them to knock out a handful of monsters with the rough speed and durability of weaker level 5s was also limited. They succeeded, but it proved an unexpected hassle. "Captain," Rihanna said, breathing heavily since she had been front and center as a tamer, "we might need to come up with a better way. Next time, we set a nice curse on them," Ilta bluntly declared, growing as she stood over one Antica that had refused to go down quietly. Shakti was rather in agreement though, stating, "That does seem to be best. Still, we succeeded. Tamana, join Rihanna and I in harvesting. The rest of you, keep watch to ensure nothing decides to come for an easy meal." The Antica did not prove to be the only non-traditional monster for them to find. Rihanna made some sort of noise besides Shakti. Shakti too felt something that made her tilt her head. She quickly shook it off though, instead commenting seriously, "I read of these. Pakara, although neither Zeus nor Hera left much else. I am unsure if we've ever seen such an obvious life cycle of a monster species before." The seal-like monsters before them were clearly a herd. Unlike the raptors, these ones weren't all combatants too. Not when some of them were quite clearly babies and other young, watched over by what appeared to be their mothers. "Fascinating," Rihanna said, mouth running in a whisper even as she restrained herself. "I've never visited the Arctic regions on the surface, but they almost appear to be mimicking seals or walruses properly. I've read a bit about them. The species exhibit varying degrees of polygyny, with the females raising the young. Male walruses also sometimes look after them." "Well, it seems fitting. Their mothers are watching," Shakti remarked, turning her head to focus in on the form that heaved itself out of the water. "And there is seemingly the protector." As unthreatening as the babies appeared, that wasn't the case for when they got older. The babies were maybe the size of an adult human, if heavier looking due to plenty of blubber. The mothers were significantly larger. This, what she assumed to be a male, was at least 12 meters long and 5 tall. It also had prominent horns that could do damage if its head or tail caught landed a blow. The Pokaraden. They ended up stalking the group for a short time. Shakti wasn't sure if they wanted to attack the large one when its mates could assist it. Yet, it was an interesting sight. The clear young monster offered possibilities as a tamer, especially upon seeing what they could grow to. Rihanna, Ledico, and Tamana also agreed. "I want one," Rihanna whispered with some furor in her voice. "Entirely professional." Of course, that meant they kept their distance. The monsters did not seem the most sensitive to stalkers, but they were aware. The mothers were quick to give warning signs at the sight of them. Their watching eventually led to them witnessing a harsh break in the atmosphere. Something is coming," Shakti said as she spotted something out of the corner of her eyes. She was the first to spot it, not as focused on the monsters before them. The others quickly looked, but it was basically too late. It was honestly shocking how quickly it came. How little warning there was. Despite the sheer ice and snow in most directions, all that rose was a horn. Or a fin. Something sliding through the ice. It was fast, and barely even made vibrations through the ground. It only became apparent when it burst from the ground, sharp horn tearing one of the mothers in half. Half of it immediately being snapped up by the monster as it rose. It was a blue and white wyvern technically, forearms also forming wings, but was a monster that could only be called dragon. Its head bore a blade-like horn, a large dorsal fin-like horn on its back, tail ending in a spiked club, and other spikes all over its body. The Pokaraden let out a furious cry, and immediately started moving towards the new enemy. The dragon interloper was far faster though. The other half of the Pokara was eaten, and its tail killed another with a spin before it faced and met the Pokaraden head-on with a stab of its head. The two monsters were immediately engaged in a ferocious battle, biting, stabbing, and ramming at each other. "I saw that thing before." It descended on the Valgang dragons, Ilta warned, eyes narrowing in complete seriousness at the new threat. Shakti understood the implication, but it was too much an opportunity for Shakti to not stand and declare, "We move in. Wait for those two to wound each other more, and then we'll finish them off." Ideally, they could come out of this with the magic stones and a hopefully drops of the downed Pakara, Pokaraden, and dragon. "Rihanna, watch the skies and ground both. Ensure we aren't surprised," Shakti called as they started moving, keeping the high ground over the two large monsters clashing below them in the valley. "Graint, Ledico, Ilta, target their flanks and rear. I'll stay in front to draw any attacks. Tamana, put duality shelter in me in case. Disol, Reshid, guard Tamana and keep away any of the other Pakara." Reaching right above them as the two monsters rammed into the ice wall, Shakti dropped. Spear coming down first, targeted carefully for her opening strike. The wing of the dragon. Her spear pierced and the dragon roared, but it also acted shockingly fast. Pulling away from the Pokaraden, it spun and Shakti barely avoided being thrown away. The same for the following tail strike, spikes of its tail whistling right by her. Just as important was the way it put it out of range of the others, who instead had to drop down on the Pokaraden. Oria. Gra. Hum. The blows of the three landed on the Pokaraden, but like Shakti's strike it only caused it to cry out before lashing at the new attackers. "That thing is thick," Ilta cried as she jumped. "Both hide and blubber protect it," Graint added, taking a blow on the shield and digging furrows in the ground as he was sent sliding back. "Just keep at it," Shakti ordered as she was sent into her own series of dodges as she tried to close the distance with the dragon. Her attempt to stab at its tail piercing halfway through its scales. "You all focus on that one. Rihanna, support me from afar with this one." The battle was not a fast one. The Pokaraden was a bulky enemy. Not as high of defenses as a scaled enemy, but critically wounding it was more than a mere challenge. Its furred hide deflected enough, and it had feet of thick, dense blubber underneath that absorbed more. Ilta was forced to take the riskiest position, attacking its head and back that weren't as soft to blunt strikes as elsewhere. Graint and Ladako carved into its sides, but it seemingly ignored the wounds littering its flanks that didn't reach deep. And Shakti was hardly better. The dragon was every bit the foe it appeared as. It was not hard to guess that this would triumph over a Valgang dragon. While not as large, its scales were just as hard. The tail, head, and wing spikes lent every moment an extra lethality. Worse, it was also far faster. Shakti jumped and rolled, and still felt her shoulder split open as a cut was opened from the tail strike it unleashed. She had to ignore it, darting back in for the instant it gathered itself again after the spin. Already given up on breaking that main horn, she thrust her spear into its wing again. Dozens of strikes had come to litter its left wing, all centered on a single target area. The spear had sunk in, but Shakti was forced to retreat before its attack caught her. Barely any distance made, It flapped its wings hard enough that the wind buffeted and threw her back. She landed, but the monster was following up. It dived into the ice, punching through with utter ease. It then rushed at her, surfacing and descending as if swimming through the ice. Ice and snow launching with its passage, and its cresting exceedingly dangerous due to the sharp horn on its head. Clear the way. Shakti yelled at her comrades, even as she wanted for the right moment. Right as it was about to crest and run her over, she darted just enough to the side to avoid its horn and thrust her spear right into its neck as it passed. It landed, its May passing half buried her in ice, and it continued on despite the counterstrike. After all, the other battle was happening right behind her. Her fellow familiar members had heeded her warning and jumped out of the way. The Pokeradon was not so agile, and so found itself stabbed by the horn before the entire weight of the dragon slammed into it. The horn ripped out in a grisly display that sent the Pokeradon crying in pain and rage. The Pokeradon struck right back despite the terrible wound inflicted. Its head rammed into the dragon, and it used its horn to tear a gash in its neck. Greater bulk pushed the dragon back, and a bodily spin sent that great, horned tail slamming into the dragon and actually knocking it onto its side. Hit the dragon, Shakti called as she went in and started stabbing at the monster as it tried to scrabble back to a standing position. Her familiar members joined. It actually stayed down for precious seconds, primarily from the Pokeradon attacking, but it was not so easily finished off. A flap of its wings pushed them away, and its head swung around to inflict another wound to distract the Pokeradon. It then stood back up. A flap of its wings then proved it could indeed fly, and it hovered as it drew in breath. A fierce roar echoed as a red energy started sparking from it. Clearly with new energy and power, it dived down shockingly fast to land right between them and the Pokeradon. Its head was buried in the ice, and it spun. Head still in, it threw up massive amounts of ice and snow, which as it span almost turned into a mini tornado that then exploded with the red energy, which burned. Gah! Gah! Ilta and Ledico were thrown away, and even Graint sunk to his knees as the red energy seemed to cling to him, the armored tank of the group groaning. In pain. Shakti was right with him, gritting her teeth as she landed and unable to help body seizing up for a moment at the unexpected pain. Whatever that was, it wasn't of the fire element as it got past duality shelter. All the time needed for the dragon to then shoot at the Pokeradon in a fast glide, once again stabbing into it and ramming it against a cliff. It only continued on, more flaps of its wings building up speed. It did a circuit around the valley, buffeting them all with wing and ice that threw them away and froze limbs for precious seconds. The former was unavoidable, but duality shelter spared Shakti of the latter, which made her aware as the dragon went after the dead Pakara over them. The red energy was gone, but it was soon chomping with eager intent at the monster. Hatema Da flared with its intent, as well as the way the energy consumed was being molded and guided. Shakti's eyes met Rihanna, who nodded with the same understanding. The level 5 started firing her arrows at the Pokeradon while crying out, "Go!" Shakti ignored the dragon and instead darted at the weakened other monster, stabbing with all her force and weight behind it. It cried, but the wounds had finally taken their toll. Shakti did not reach magic core with that strike, but a jump put her landing and stabbing deep into the largest wound it bore. It cried again, but this time she lifted the spear out before stabbing right back down. The monster's head rose, moving to try and strike at her. "Ha!" she cried, putting everything into finishing it first. She felt the magic stone, and her spear pierced it. The monster seemed to let out a final breath, eyes focused on her, but then it dissolved into ash and Shakti fell onto the snow. Despite the situation, she took a second to recover. Enough to spot the piece of glittering ice that almost seemed shaped like a tear. She snatched the drop that burned, it was so cold. "Retreat," she then called, waving the others as they recovered away. "The dragon will recover." Thus, they fled in the face of the dragon that used its food to recover, forced to satisfy themselves with having prevented it from eating the Pokeradon too for more of a boost. "Are you all right?" Zenz asked when they finally made it back to the cave, after the difficult effort of losing the angry dragon. "You. Don't comment on a lady's messy appearance, farm boy," Ilta told him, not able to hide the exhaustion in her voice. She did manage to give him a punch to the shoulder, though. "We just had a hard fight. Does anyone need potions?" Anais quickly asked. "Or healing?" Krem asked, sitting up from her bedroll. "Not healing," Shakti quickly answered, though, shaking her head. "You focus on recovering. As for potions, Ilta, Ledico, you take 2. Graint." "I can handle it," he grunted stoically. I too have healing power, Shakti said, even as she half collapsed into a sitting position against the cave wall. Let's just rest, Anne. We'll go back out. They shared information of what they had been doing, even as Shakti fell into a meditation to try and enhance healing power's effect. Yo, what? Shakti tried to not allow her voice to raise, but she wasn't sure she succeeded as she looked at her little brother. I want to get a Falna, Jain claimed with a shrug, speaking entirely casually even as she shook. I'm going to be turning 10 soon, and Lord Ganesha will allow it. It's expected, isn't it? It might be expected, but that doesn't mean you can't refuse, she reminded, still keeping a strict hold of her tone. I meant that it's only expected that I want to, right? He retorted though, sending her a look. Not all of us are like you, sis. I want to be an adventurer, like Dad and Mom. Shakti restrained herself. After all, what could she say? They had the more normal thought process, wasn't it? The Vamma family had been serving Lord Ganesha for near 300 years. They would be the 6th generation. Captains since had been of their line. The cost, the family curse, it was just part of that legacy, of being a family of adventurers. If she couldn't convince him otherwise. Congratulations, she told him, ruffling his hair playfully. You'll be a great adventurer. Ah, stop it, sis. You're ruining my hair, Tilda, he whined. But it's so fun, she teased. No, it is SSSent. It was. Unlike Shakti, who inherited the straighter hair of their father, he had inherited mother's fluffier hair. Puffy and thick, it really was so soft it was fun to play with. Finally managing to fend her off, he tried to straighten it again while pouting at her. But how about you wait a little bit to get your Falna? She asked. What? Why? Well, your big sister needs a little head start, she whispered to him, winking. He gawped, only to then burst out. You're going to get your Falna finally. I suppose it's time, she answered, giggling at his exclamation. Can you give me a little bit of time, though? Like, half a year. You just want to get ahead of me. Yep, she answered freely, popping her lips and smirking at him. Part of being a big sister. Can't allow you to surpass me. I'll have to be the stronger one protecting you, like always. CIs. I'm going to be an adventurer. No, I'm not hearing it. I'll go tell Mom, Dad, and Lord Ganesha. 6 months. She was soon running from him, laughing at her angry face. Shakti got her Falna at 14, upon hearing her younger brother would indeed become an adventurer. The next time she led a venturing party, she had Ilta, Ligand, Veta, Anais, Udar, Dench, and Zens. With the previous scouting, this time they moved out with more purpose. They found another group of Antica and started following the herbivores. This eventually led them to one of the smaller pantries of the floor. It was surprisingly normal. The usual pantry with their towering crystals and pools of colored liquid that monsters swarmed very much stuck out. Here, this was little more than what appeared to be a more hospitable valley. Exposed rock and even some plants, and flowing water from what would appear to be an underwater hot spring. No flood of monsters. Only the colors within the water giving away what it was. Naturally, the details revealed the danger. Some of the plants were the frozen fruit of these floors that would kill a level 5 if eaten, and were uncomfortable to even hold as they harvested them. A few of the others warranted harvesting too as potential materials, but most was useless to anything that couldn't digest cellulose. The water contained subtle colors within that gave it away, and prevented them from drinking it. The lack of monsters was also easy to explain. They were skittish, because predators would stalk this area for the same reason as the expedition came here. Something rocketing out of the water was little surprise. Shakti ran to keep ahead of the quills shot at her, reached a boulder which she jumped at to use as a platform to jump right at the monster. High enough to reach its head that it kept out of reach by standing on a prehensile tail. Said tail also allowed it to bend to avoid a thrust to the eye, but it failed to avoid the slash to its crest-like fin. It angrily shot more quills from the end of its crest at her airborne form, but she spun her spear to deflect them all. Its focus on her allowed Veta and Udar to dart in at its back to stab at it with their spear. Zens moved to follow them, heavy rock collected around one arm. At it spun at them and focused in on the charging level 4. Ilta came in to punch it before it connected an attack on Zens. Although its counterattack on Ilta sent her flying back, Zens managed to weave under its form to unleash a loaded blow into its belly. The rock around his arm shattered, and the level 4 grimaced before yelling as he made distance. Its belly is hard. Don't bother. Expected, with its appearance, but still worth confirming. This monster was a rather odd-looking one. Maybe some evolution of mermaid. Its body was like a snake, but it had both forearms and legs. Possibly worse was a disturbingly humanoid face and fins on its head that joined together in a crest that vaguely could be mistaken as hair. Clearly still bothered by the strike and its failure to land many effective blows of its own, the monsters reared up again. Perched on its tail, it had to be 12 meters or so. Its arms, previously kept close to it, extended to show them to be shockingly large. It then lunged forward, tail sticking to the ground like suction. This allowed its snake-like body to swing back and forth, raking its clawed forearms out far. Zenz, Udar, and even Veta yelped as they were forced to block and retreat. Ilta was already out of range. Ligand took the blow with a large axe, stopping it long enough for Shakti to lunge forward with a thrust. Over-aiming for its face again where it could weave its body, Shakti instead targeted an extended forearm. Her thrusts pierced, and blood spurted. The monster cried and struck at her with the other, but Shakti refused to budge this time. She instead put more force behind the thrust till it pierced straight through the forearm. Ilta too arrived to unleash a thunderous blow right at the same spot Shakti had stabbed. A crunch rang out as the retaliatory blow arrived. Shakti moved to absorb it, accepting the blow with a grunt. A raised arm absorbed the impact and meant the claws tore her arm over her torso, and she used the way she was thrown to tear her spear out of it to create an even grislier mess. Ilta then landed a blow to its neck before moving away. The monster shrieked and hissed, and suddenly started coughing. It then spat a large cloud of powder. Everyone knew enough to avoid such, but the sheer amount made it impossible. Upon contact, Veta and Zenz both fell onto their stomachs. Notably, Udar, Anais, and Ligand were fine, which made the answer clear. Sleep poison. Works on F rank. Udar called even as he moved and grabbed both Veta and Zenz to start moving them away while crying. Veta, you've been slacking on abnormal resistance again. I keep telling you. Guard them, Shakti called, although Ligand was already on it. Hissing, the monster suddenly turned and tried to dive back into the water. Frigid petrification. It was a step behind, Anais having been waiting for this exact move and freezing the water solid. The new ice cracked as the monster rammed into it, but held. The monster was also stunned by the impact and squirmed on its side as it tried to recover. On it, Ilta said as she dived down to start attacking it. Shakti was right behind her. Possibly more important, though, was the move by Dench, who finally yelled out as he threw two objects. I finished them. Ligand and Udar grabbed the two objects, revealing them as hooks with ropes attached. Both moved with familiarity. The hooks were thrown to latch onto some part of the monster, joining one by Dench himself, and when it rose they pulled. Already trying to recover from Shakti and Ilta's assault, the monster came down with a cry of surprise. It subsequently struggled even harder, and the three started struggling as the full force of the monster started combating them, until more hands grabbed the robes. Veta joined his brother, and Zenz managed to get to Dench. We're up, just so bored we decided to take a nap. Damn it, so embarrassing. Seems that while able to affect those with merely F rank in abnormal resistance, the sleep powder only knocked them out 10 seconds or so. An eternity in a fight, at times, but not irrecoverable with teammates. Such thoughts rose in Shakti's mind even as she came down on the head of the monster, spear thrusting down through its eyes and into its brain. The partially secured pantry served Abel in its desired role. It was a very convenient lure. Monsters frequently stopped by, allowing them to prepare ahead of time and familiarize themselves with the terrain to ambush them. Near to the sea as it was, a number of aquatic monsters came by. Some penguin-like monsters with metallic spines within their feathers. Another of the mermaid snakes monster even came by. More secure now, Shakti used the chance to face it solo. It made the fight rougher, but that was necessary. An unexpected benefit also showed from not cutting the fight short like they had before. This second managed to survive long enough to do some odd maneuver where it cracked shells on its stomach that created a number of effects. They managed to secure a few of said shells, although they weren't able to deduce where the monster collected them from. More monsters came. Several bear monsters with snow-white fur, manes, and ice spikes. More ice raptors. Another bear monster, although this one with rabbit features too, a beak, and a shelled stomach. Shakti had them as a group handle the first of each one, but she ended up soloing the second bear monster, penguins, and ice raptors too alongside the mermaid monster. Also some less aggressive monsters. They are giving us the gimlet eye. No, they aren't. Yeah, they absolutely are. Well, it is rather easy to understand. The Antica herd, on one hand, seemed surprisingly casual in coming to drink and feed from the pantry. They seemingly had little fear of them. On the other, however, they did not seem pleased with them either. If a monster could send an unamused look, they were. Their short horns, however, rather explained it. I guess they remember us attacking, knocking them out, and cutting off their horns but leaving them alive. The horns are growing back. I sure as hell wouldn't accept that excuse if someone cut my hair off the same way. While very much taking their time to eat and drink their fill compared to usual from seemingly accepting that they weren't in mortal danger, it was with a very notable prickliness that they left afterwards. "Oh, they are so cute," Anais couldn't help but say as they watched the Pakara drinking from the pantry. "Don't get too close," Shakti warned, which was emphasized as the mothers started letting out barking noises at the sight of them. The mothers will attack, and don't forget that they are monsters and what they'll grow into. Although, the fact that the babies seemingly didn't share their mother's instincts and came close in curiosity didn't help. Babies who went up to unknown things in a landscape where most things would eat them didn't imply a strong survival instinct, but here they were. At least a big one wasn't here. Although that made Ilta question, "Do you think this is the herd of that Pokaraden?" That really made the babies seemingly wanting to play with her, the one that killed that Pokaraden, even weirder. "Gotcha," Ilta suddenly called, her hand having flashed out from where she'd been standing over the water. Out came a fish. A proper fish. Ilta immediately jumped out to where it landed on the ground, and circled it while dabbing at it with a hand like she was a cat person. "I knew I saw fish. That water is deeper than expected and they are hiding, but I knew I could get one." "A fish?" Anais asked as she came close, eyebrow furrowed in thought. "Not a monster." "Not sure," Ilta claimed with a shrug. "I've also seen some insects here," Rihanna said as she bounded down from her overwatch position, sending Shakti a significant look. "Small ones." Shakti hummed at that. True, the dungeon produced a surprising amount of creatures. Some territories like the large tree labyrinth and dense forest ravine had numerous plants and insect-like monsters, and the water city obviously focused on aquatic monsters and plants. At least the insects and fish though were monsters. The environments there wasn't like a natural one on the surface, where ecosystems were sustained by seemingly insignificant things like mold, lichens, small fish, insects, etc. "Let's catch some of the insects," Shakti quickly ordered. "We need to check if they have magic stones." A minute later, their new activity was interrupted by Ilta yelling, "Yuck." Shakti turned to see her spitting, the fish cut open. It made her ask incredulously, "Did you seriously try to eat some?" "I didn't find a magic stone, Tilda," Ilta whined, still spitting even as she tried to defend herself. "But you can taste the dungeon on this." The dungeon was not hospitable, no matter how much adventurers might get used to it. It had a certain foulness to it. Some energy that was antithesis to the natural order of the world above. There were indeed sometimes certain plants, water sources, and even monster parts or drops that could be eaten and consumed. The vast majority, however, carried the energy of the dungeon, which inflicted anima erosion, soul damage, on the mortal races. Even among Zeus and Hera, only Gluttony had a skill that granted him protection from such realities. Thinking such, Shakti could only sigh and remark, "I think if it was that easy, the Zeus and Hera familia would have learned long ago." There were things you could eat in this territory, and they were frozen fruit that offered different dangers. "She's right in one aspect, though," Rihanna commented from where she'd just been examining an insect. "If these things have magic stones, they are so small as to be unnoticeable." An interesting conundrum that could have implications on how the dungeon worked on these floors, supported these monster ecosystems as opposed to earlier floors where everything was basically spawned on the spot by the dungeon. They didn't have much time for such thoughts though, as it wasn't only cute or manageable monsters that came. The small, in as only roughly human-sized, wyverns came diving down at them. The particularly snake-like monsters were a hassle to handle. They spat poison and launched harrying strikes. Together with their numbers and agile flight capabilities, they could only be called annoying pests. Annoying pests. Ligand grunted as he once again missed them, inadvertently proving Shakti's thoughts. Although she sliced two in one strike before exclaiming firmly, "No matter, they aren't endless. Just keep taking them down." Pests, and good at harrying or not, they were manageable. Their poison was weak, with not a single member of their squad lacking the abnormal resistance rank to reduce the effects down to minor tingling. Their tail and diving attacks also lacked the impact to bother them. Maybe if they were weakened or someone was isolated, they could be a danger. As it was just a matter of winnowing them down till they fled. at least, until Shakti felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "See, Captain," Anais called out, having been in the back. "I think I." Dench also contributed. Chienthrope ears perked as he looked to the sky. Ilta was crouched and ignoring the little monsters, readying herself too. Shakti felt the instinct surging inside her though, and instead made the judgment call and declared, "Retreat. Something is coming." Despite the uncertainty, the party listened to her. Ignoring the monsters, they started running. They took all their gear, but otherwise moved as quickly as possible. As they reached several miles from the pantry, they heard a roar. Then another. Shakti decided she was right to have run. As they moved to a different island, they heard a trumpeting sound and turned to see a massive, furred elephant monster crossing onto the pantry island from a different one. Its own noise sounded furious. It charging forward despite the two separates roars coming from the pantry. Yes, it was definitely the right call to have fled. Unfortunately, not everything would be a right call. Not here. Not in a floor with new monsters and dangers abound. Gah! Graint let out as he blocked the tail strike of the monster, his shield half cut through alone and a cut made on his shoulder with the same blow. "Make distance," Shakti called urgently even as she threw her spear. It caught the monster in one of the wounds they'd managed to call, and a subsequent leap had her landing on her feet right beside it. Grasping it allowed her to stay on even as the monster started jerking to try and buck her off, and an attempt by Ilta to break the armored head crest Shakti had managed to crack further. Her blow made the monster recoil and stall, but not enough to actually harm it. It instead threw its head to remove her, but that was enough for Shakti to stab deeper before jumping straight up while cracking against another of its dorsal spines. It ignored her, however, breathing in. Already seeing this, Shakti called out, "Close and launch one wave of attacks." Everyone moved to do so, even Ilta who was right before the monster. This seemingly left her entirely open as it roared, expelling not just air but also a bright blue beam of ice. It swallowed the Amazon. Shakti did not mind it. Instead she used the height from her jump and its stationary position to come down on its head. Even as Graint and Ligand struck at its tail and the rest at its flank, her spear lashed out with all her power into its cracked head crest. This time, the crack split entirely, and a subsequently spin with all the power she could muster broke off and threw a piece of the crest away. It made the monster stop its attack, roaring in agony. Said move also revealed Ilta, safe and still charging. Tamana's spell having protected her. This also provided Ilta the perfect opening to jump and land a kick right into the vulnerable part of its head now exposed. The monster did not cease being a threat, despite the damage being incurred. Like a larger Bloodsaurus from the Great Forest Ravine, this one was just blue and clearly with ice powers. The size and strong defense and attack made it a dominant foe though. Shakti wasn't sure if she should have called for them to try and ambush it as she had, especially as it kept fighting. It suddenly started rolling forward in a wheel-like attack, forcing everyone to be blown back beside Graint and his two helpers who finally blocked it. However, its follow-up was swift. Slamming its tail into the ice, it came up with an almost perfectly formed blade which then swung down. This time, Graint's shield didn't survive. It was cut through entirely, along with the arm holding it. Gara! The level 5 let out, not able to avoid it at the sensation of his arm being cut off. Sir Master. Dissol and Reshid let out, diving in front to absorb a follow-up blow. This one caught both their shields, and while they didn't vut through sent them flying into Graint. All three were sent sprawling. Pull back to Rihanna's position, Shakti called, blood and alarm racing anew throughout her at the sight. Do not engage. Landing next to them, Shakti pulled up Graint and all but lifted him as they started running. Others helped Reshid and Dissol. The flight remained panicked though, the monster not allowing them to flee easily. Only the sight of Rihanna waving them through a small canyon scented Shakti, and had her lead them all, including the monster, through it. As she did, the trap was sprung. The boulders set up by Rihanna as a backup plan falling as they passed, and crashing right onto the following monster. Even with its great size and strength, Rihanna's trap was set up well to hurt and stall the monster. It made Shakti order, turn and counterattack. "Go, Captain," Graint told her, hand clutching his bleeding forearm. "I can handle myself." Shakti might have protested, but seeing the monster pick up a boulder in its jaws and throw it at Tamana made her act. Parting from Graint, she leapt. She didn't have enough time to reach Tamana, so instead sent herself at the flying boulder. Her shoulder connected with it as it flew. The impact sent her flying, but also redirected the boulder enough to miss Tamana. Shakti rolled but clutched the ground till she regained her feet, and then immediately leapt back in. Her shoulder was blooming with pain, but that wasn't enough for her to stop using it to pull back her spear. Her next thrust instead snapped off another of the monster's spines that had been cracked by the falling boulders. She then let out a series of blows that cracked against its jaws, preventing it from lunging and biting at its attackers. It was through upholding this precarious dance as the monster snapped and shot its ice beam at her that the others finally managed to inflict the wounds to bring it down after Krem, up with Rihanna, finally shot off a nature's burn that opened numerous new wounds for them to target. "I'm fine, you darn kids," Grant grunted once they were back at the cave, wrapping up his new stump stoically, also waving away those crowding him. "It's an arm. The gods saw fit to grant me two. I'm sorry, if only I could reattach them," Krem said, wilting at the limits of her healing spell. "Or if you hadn't allowed us to use the elixirs to do so," Dissol added, clenching his fists. "Someone was going to lose one, and I'm not bothered by eventually getting a prosthetic," Grant told them, new authority now in his voice. Although he then added while looking to Shakti, "Especially because I figure I'll have some help springing for one of the best." "Of course," she replied, trying not to allow her own tension to show. "Well, there you have it. I'll be back to normal soon. Until then," he said as he stood, and actually snatched one of his supporters' shields with a grin. "I'll show you that even down an arm, I can still do my job as our shield." An arm was not all that was lost. In truth, even Shakti was caught off guard by this one. It wasn't just a dangerous foe. It was the ground erupting at their feet. Ice splintering and a great black form shooting out. The ice that had seemed so solid just seconds ago cracking all around them, succumbing to their weight and plunging them into water that sought to steal the warmth from one's heart. The whale monsters. Shakti had read of them. They were particularly bad when it came to wagons, tearing up the ice sheets to dump adventurers and supplies into the waters. Shakti had kept them moving when traveling between islands, and so had largely foregone thinking of them as a threat, and so made the mistake of allowing their group to stop on thick ice to talk for a minute too long. Not having time to berate herself for the mistake, Shakti pulled her spear from where she'd managed to stab the whale monster by instinct. Raising a leg, she kicked it as hard as possible. It sent her moving to the edge of the ice, where she collided. Fingers digging into said ice, she pulled herself out of the water swiftly. The first of the half of the group that had fallen in with the attack, which she moved to correct too. As soon as she had her feet under her, she reached in and pulled Krem out. Rihanna had gotten Dench out, but that left Disc and Anais still in the water. Shakti's arm reached out for Disc, but a form jumped out of the water. A small, only torso-sized shark monster had taken advantage of the opening to close its jaws over her arm. Shakti couldn't hold in the cry of pain at the attack, but she counterattacked almost immediately. A knife was pulled from a pocket and stabbed into its eye to be buried to the hilt. Another 3 such stabs eventually forced it to drop off. It wasn't alone, though, as a swarm of monsters arose to clasp onto Disc and Anais to prevent them from climbing out of the water despite their struggles. Then an even larger form dived over them. The whale monster had returned, all but landing on them and pushing them out of sight in an instant. Shakti dived into the water without hesitation. The cold bit at her again. The monsters bit at her again. The light was dim enough that it immediately felt like another world. Yet, she still started swimming down. Her spear lashed out to cut up the shark monsters that approached her, and that was before she threw it into the back of the whale trying to swim deeper with both Disc and Anais. It dug into it, making it jerk and stop swimming for a moment. Strength and speed pushed Shakti through the water fast enough to take advantage of that, colliding with its back and grabbing her spear. Yelling even as it meant water flooded into her throat, she tore the spear through the monster till she finally connected with its magic stone. As it disappeared, she grabbed Anais' hand while trying to signal Disc to follow. She then didn't have time before looking upwards back at the light again, and shooting up in a swim as fast as possible. More of the shark monsters swarmed, but she cut through them and Anais was not passive either. More bites and blood started flowing from Shakti's body into the water, but the light was reached and they crested. TT take her. Shakti let out as she pushed Anais first into the grasping hands of their comrades. Disc. Not up. That was all Shakti needed to dive right back down. More monsters swarming, but she saw Disc's form sinking deeper. She dived after him, forcing her aching and screaming muscles to push faster, fighting back exhaustion and cold trying to sap at her, shooting through the water at speeds that it was hard to imagine she couldn't reach someone falling. Then a monster managed to bite onto her, and a millisecond was needed to cut it off. Then another. 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 Shakti felt the very instant as she made the realization she wouldn't reach him in time. He was sinking even further into darkness. More monsters were swarming him, and he wasn't struggling. Even if she could fight through the underwater swarm, to reach him and then escape again. Time seemed to freeze for her as her mind raced. Did he see her? Did he make the same realization that she had? Or had the monsters already gotten to him? Had he already faded into the blackness even if she still could? Or was that fantasy, see his form still in the light? Then an even larger blob of darkness surged, and lashed out to swallow Disk in an instant. And tentacles of darkness surged at Shakti. Now, even she couldn't think of any thoughts but defense. Of cutting the tentacles that were trying to latch onto her. Turning around and going as fast as possible to the surface. Ignoring the small monsters that tried to latch on. She didn't make it. A tentacle grasped her ankle. Her spear lashed out to cut it. Yet, her momentum was slowed. Milliseconds everything in a battle like this. A race to the light. She tried swimming even as she looked down, cutting more tentacles as they reached for her. More and more and more. As Shakti was about to have a new realization, she heard something breaking the water. On instinct, her hand lashed out to the side to grasp what it was. A spear. A spear with a rope tied to the end. A great tug pulled her away from the tentacles that moved to grasp her, and the distance to the surface was closed in an instant. Shakti flew out of the water, the light almost blinding her after that battle against the encroaching darkness. The spear in her hand, attached to the rope that the rest of her familiar had pulled her out by. Yet, she was airborne, and the monster was not so readily going to give her up as tentacles followed out of the water to grasp her as she was still in midair. "We got you, a frack off." Ligand and Veta called out as they jumped, axe and spear cutting through the tentacles. They landed, and for an instant the feel of feet beneath her feet made Shakti forget. An instant. Then she yelled, "Move back to the islands." No one needed further encouragement as only more tentacles followed. They tore through the ice like paper. The surface under their feet fracturing in moments and threatening to plunge them down again. Yet this time, they were not caught by surprise. This time, they could react with all the speed of level 4 and 5 adventurers. Even as ice fractured and sunk, they maneuvered the terrain. A mere instant of contact enough to send them running even on this footing. Even the monster following at speeds not inferior to a level 4, tearing through ice wholesale and trying to grasp them with its tentacles while even pulling its large form from the water, did not catch them. Which allowed Krem, carried by Dench's spell, to say her chant. Nature's burn. As the blasts of burning white energy shot at the monster, it was finally forced to a stop. Its tentacles instead recoiling to protect itself. Only sheer size and Krem's imprecise aim allowing it to endure as holes were burned to ash by the spell. Which also allowed Shakti to act, chanting even as she spotted the perfect boulder. The mirror turns. Reflections abound. I look upon myself, what do I see? As she chanted, she launched herself at the boulder. Landing feet first, she used it to launch herself right in the opposite direction. Right at the stalled monster that had revealed its body too. Its tentacles moved to catch her as she got close. Her spear cut through the first tentacle, and her feet landed on the remains to kick off to gain speed. The next few had to be cut, and she could only angle her body to slip through a small opening. A thick tentacle moved to block her entirely, and she stabbed into it. Stalled, she instead used her spear to flip herself right over top. Pulling her spear out, her feet landed on the opposite side, and she regained her speed with it as a platform. Its teeth-filled mouth opened to shred and devour her approaching form. Shakti finished her chant. One hand reached up to brush one tooth in the last instant, even as her other arm had her spear back for a thrust. Darpana Avimata. Her spear was then plunged into it, and she came out the other side, hole blown straight through the monster. "What are you doing?" she screamed as she struggled against their hands pulling her back. "Jaff, Laza, Kane. Let me down." "Sorry, no can do, little Shaw," Kane said as he carried her back with them. "I need to protect the bearers. Varna Freya and Brava won't be enough," she screamed, pulling. Yet, even her new level 5 strength was not enough to overcome all three. If they fall, the king falls, and all of Orario falls. It will all be for nothing. "We know, little Shaw," Kane said, sending her a smile and for once not teasing with that nickname. "We know," Jaff added emphatically. "But you don't have to be the one to go," Laza said, looking at her. "You don't have to be the one sacrificed." That only raised more alarm in her though. We were all there when you and your siblings were born. Saw the happiness and fears of your father, and we made a promise to protect you all. Yet, we failed too. Again and again. Right alongside you, we failed. You're all that is left now. Of your father, your mother, your brothers and sisters. We wanted to at least be able to protect you, but then you went and got stronger than us. So, please, allow these old men from a previous era at least once be able to say we managed to save a member of the Varna family. She struggled, she screamed. She refused to allow it. Once they set her down, they would not be able to hold her back. Stop. Listen to your commanders. Get back to your stations. Shakti. It was Lord Ganesh's word that stopped her. A simple word, backed by something far less simple. Shakti looked at him in portrayal as she felt his arcanum flowing. Not being used, but its mere presence imposing divine will onto mortals. Allow them to go, he said, arms crossed. Looking upon those three and the other veteran Ganesha members that were starting to move forth as if planned. Godspeed, warriors. They left, and Shakti's body was frozen by Lord Ganesh's presence. Yet she could still yell after then, struggling to fight this situation that had already passed outside her control. Jaff, Raza, Kane. I order you to stay. Do not think about heading to where Adi is. Shakti surged upwards as she woke, adrenaline already running from those memories. Her movement caused those watching to flinch, although that soon spread to relief as they burst out. Captain, you're okay. Oh, thank goodness, sis. Shakti looked around at them, trying to still her racing heart. As she did so, though, she flinched from pain. It made her look down to see bandages all over her. What? You were cut up in the water, and you did dive right into a whole host of teeth, sis, Ilta quickly explained, trying to speak light-hearted. I mean, you won, but you collapsed with wounds all over your body. I tried to heal what I could, but you said to not use potions for you if it isn't lethal due to healing power, Krem added, head lowered in self-recrimination. And no, you did good, Shakti told her, although she then looked around wearily and asked despite herself. Disk. The lowered heads was answer enough. Everyone gathered on the nearest islands to where that ambush had happened, lowering their heads with fists raised to their hearts in the proper direction. No words needed to be said, as everyone knew enough. Disk was an unextraordinary adventurer despite reaching level 4. A good tamer, and decent at both support and frontline combat. Yet, satisfied with where he reached even when Shakti offered to help. He had instead been a reliable senior to many of the second-tier members of the Familia. Krem and Zenz were crying, showing that. Orario would hardly remember him and his name would not echo in legend even within the Ganesha Familia, but he had reached the 59th floor regardless. A warrior of Orario who had helped continue the long battle against the dungeon. Afterwards, it was apparent over the next few days that the expedition was straining at the seams. Everyone fought with a grim resolve against inevitable desperation. Wounds were accrued, and potions running out. Stress built up, both physically and mentally. And Shakti was no different. Maybe the worse, in fact. With the healing power DA, she refused all but the absolute necessity with potions and healing. Even with the fact that its mind demand left her weakened. Not helped by her getting wounded more, taking even more and more of the burden of the combat onto herself. As for her mentally after they suffered a proper casualty. Why did you go out? She demanded angrily, facing Ilta. Her eyes then swept the group that had followed her. Didn't I say that I would always lead the venturing team? Did you think sneaking out as I was sleeping was fine? You needed the sleep, Ilta argued, gesturing at her. You're exhausted. That doesn't change anything. Of course it does, Ilta snapped back. You're exhausted because you are refusing to allow yourself to rest. You are leading all the venturing groups. While half of us rest and sleep, you are leading the other half out again. You hadn't slept for 3 days. And this is what happens when I do, Shakti countered. We didn't go far. It's still dangerous. See, Captain, Zen spoke, finally lifting his head to meet her eyes. He was clearly nervous, trembling even, but he didn't back down. We've got to do this. All of us do our part. Enough to make this worth it. It didn't need to be said what it had to be worth, although the allusion to Disk made Shakti approach to grab his shoulders to say emphatically, that's why Tilda. If you aren't with me, if I'm not around when you fight. Enurakti Viroda won't apply to them. Not able to say that aloud, however, she instead spun and stalked away. She was honestly considering starting the climb back up again. They had fought no small bit. They had suffered a death, Great was crippled, and wounds were piling up. As it was, they had to return in 2 days from supply issues. Did it matter if they left early? Shakti looked at her hand at that, opening and closing it. She had fought a number of monsters. Had she fought enough? Could she level up at this? It was impossible to say for certain. If they went up now and she couldn't. Fixing a stoic look on her face, she forced herself into another nap while giving Ilta the cold shoulder. She then gave Ligand an order to stay here with everyone as she set out alone, a few extra weapons and a potion. She knew of at least one monster that had proven too much for a group of level 5s before, and she knew at least one place it hunted. The Swordhorn dragon roared. Shakti screamed right back. Its scales shattered under her blows. Her blood flew through the air from its strikes. It flapped its wings ferociously, emitting that red energy again even as it threw ice boulders at her. Her spear was deflected, even with Darpana Avamutta applied, falling into a distant hill even as it forced her away. She failed. At least we didn't lose anyone from this, she mumbled to herself as she stumbled along. The comfort of her words didn't change the way her body hurt. The blood flowing from a number of cuts and wounds over her body aching from blunt blows, bones creaking in a way that finally made her feel her age. It was with shaking hands that she opened the potion, pouring it with a wince onto the large gash in her side that was the most threatening. It made the wound close. Mostly. A bit of blood still leaked, and most of the rest of a furious scab over fresh skin. Finally, no longer hearing the dragon's roars, she stumbled into a gap between 2 boulders. Honestly, it was barely that. Her feet poked out, to alert anything nearby where she was. She did not have the strength to search for more. She just needed to meditate for several minutes and force healing power to really kick in. Shakti recoiled as liquid poured on her, immediately coughing as her blood flowed fresh again and pain receded. The shock of it left her trembling though. Made her feel overwhelmed as she opened her eyes, seeing a dark form looking down on her. After shaking her head for a moment, she opened them again to see no one there. Yet, she saw footprints in the snow before the crevice that weren't her own. Far larger. She also finally turned to the liquid that had hit her head to flow over her body. Already suspecting based on how her wounds had been healed and more, she raised a hand to lick the back of it. An elixir, she asked herself. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. There was really only one person that could be down here, be the type to use a 500,000 Valis potion on someone else, do so by pouring it over their head without a care, and then immediately disappear without a word. It was all so very Otter, she forced out after finally managing to track him down. The Boaz warrior turned his head to look at her as she closed the distance. He looked worn himself, admittedly. He had a beard of all things growing, his clothes were worn as if from weeks of travel, and he had the smell of blood and dirt that clung to adventurers after enough time in the dungeon. Yet, he was still in better condition than her. He wasn't worn from combat, but environmental hazard and deprivation. He also had a literal tree trunk held over one shoulder, but Shakti really didn't even care about something odd like that right now. Ankusha, he grunted simply. K-King, she corrected, shaking her head and trying to gather herself. I assume you poured that elixir on me. He didn't respond, instead looking forward again. Apologies if this is shameless of me since you already did so, but... Shakti started, desperation overcoming her usual distance with Orario's strongest. Instead she gave a weak smile, with some of that desperation leaking into it, as she asked, can you give me some advice instead? That got slightly widened eyes from him. Shakti sat across the growing fire from Otter, looking into it. The man had chosen to build it at the top of a hill, offering a view of the surroundings, uncaring of what it might signal to come to. So, she started, a bit unsure on how to interact with the Boaz since she rarely did besides in professional settings. You brought a tree down from the lower floors to start a fire. I can endure cold, he answered simply. I do not like it. Well, if you have the ability to cut down a tree in a single strike and literally carry it multiple floors on your shoulders. Although she did have to point out, you do realize that there are many coal deposits on this floor to burn, right? Not the most pleasant of fires, but what we have been doing. Otter stared at her for a few moments in silence before looking back towards the fire without a word. It appeared that he did indeed miss those. It made Shakti feel awkward again, so she then remarked, I've never seen you with the beginning of a beard too. He hummed, raising a hand to his jaw. Before her eyes then, she watched as he basically cut through the facial hair with the edge of his hand. Within minutes, he was respectably shaven. I usually do so before I am seen. This would be all for today, next part coming soon, so please like, share, and subscribe to get informed as soon as the next part drops.